Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakens the power of seduction and got harem with Nami? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Crimson Tide and the Whispering Fox. The night over Konohagakure was quiet, draped in the soft velvet of peace. It was a stillness that Naruto Uzumaki was still getting used to. For years, quiet nights had been the brief, tense interludes between battles, the held breath before the storm. Now, the silence was just silence. He sat on the carved stone head of his father, the fourth Hokage, his legs dangling over the village he had nearly died to protect. Below, Konoha glittered, a sea of warm lights and softer shadows, each one a life he knew, a future he had secured. A cool breeze rustled through his blonde hair, carrying the distant sounds of laughter and the clinking of glasses from the village taverns. The Fourth Great Ninja War was a scar on the land and its people, but it was a scar that was healing. Sasuke was on his journey of atonement, the allied shinobi forces had fostered a new era of cooperation, and he, Naruto, was the undisputed hero. And he was bored. It was a guilty, gnawing sort of boredom. He had everything he'd ever dreamed of: respect, friends, a home that loved him. But the energy that had once fueled his desperate climb to the top, the Nine Tails' raw power now tempered into a loyal partnership, still thrummed beneath his skin. It was a warhorse put out to pasture, and it didn't know what to do with the quiet. Tonight was the annual Ryusei Matsuri, the Meteor Festival, a tradition celebrating a celestial event that streaked the sky with falling stars. It was meant to be a night of wishes and romance. Sakura had tried to drag him to a barbecue with Ino and the others, but he'd begged off. Needing the space to think, he felt off, restless, like the calm before a different kind of storm. He watched as the first meteor cut a brilliant white slash across the inky canvas of the sky. A collective gasp of wonder rose from the village below. More followed, a celestial ballet of light and speed. Naruto leaned back on his hands, a small, genuine smile finally touching his lips. It was beautiful. He could appreciate it for what it was, a simple, profound beauty that had nothing to do with chakra or jutsu. Then he saw it. While the other meteors were silver white, this one bled a deep, arterial crimson. It moved with a strange, almost deliberate slowness, not falling so much as descending. It grew larger, brighter, its unnatural color washing out the lesser lights around it. Down in the village, the murmurs of wonder turned to whispers of confusion and fear. It wasn't a falling star, it was an omen. Naruto sat up straight, his senses on high alert. Kurama stirred within him, a low growl of warning echoing in his mind. "Kid, what is that?" "I don't know," Naruto thought back, his eyes narrowing. "But I don't like it." The crimson light intensified, focused, and for a terrifying second, it felt like an eye opening in the heavens, staring directly at him. He braced himself, instinctively flooding his coils with sage chakra, ready for an attack. But there was no explosion, no impact. Instead, the crimson light dissolved into a wave of ethereal energy, silent and insubstantial. It washed over the Hokage mountain, over Naruto, passing through him like a ghost. He felt a bizarre warmth spread through his entire being, a tingling sensation that started in his chest and radiated out to his fingertips. It wasn't painful, it was pleasant. A strange, heady feeling, like the first warm flush of sake. For a moment, the world seemed to sharpen, the colors of the village below more vibrant, the air thick with the scent of pine and night-blooming jasmine. The energy settled deep within him, coiling around his own immense chakra reserves, and then went still. The crimson meteor was gone. The sky was back to normal, filled with the gentle silver rain of the festival. The moment passed so quickly, so quietly. He wondered if he'd imagined it. "Kurama, you feel that?" The great fox was silent for a long moment. "The energy is gone, but something changed. Be on guard." Naruto stood up, shaking his head. Maybe the peace was getting to him, making him see enemies in shooting stars. He took one last look over his village, the familiar sight somehow feeling alien, and leapt from the monument. A silent orange blur heading for home. The sea was a monster. Nami gripped the helm of the Thousand Sunny, her knuckles white, her teeth gritted against the force of the wind. Rain lashed down in blinding sheets, each drop stinging like a needle. One moment, they had been sailing under a clear sky in a relatively calm stretch of the new world. The next, the LD had turned into a churning nightmare of black water and screaming wind. "Hold on," she screamed, her voice torn away by the gale. "Frankie, check the couplings on the main mast. Usopp, get those sails tied down now." This was no ordinary storm. The waves rose like liquid mountains, impossibly steep, threatening to swallow the ship whole. The sky was a terrifying, bruised purple, but the lightning that spider-webbed across it was wrong. It was a venomous, bloody red, the same unnatural crimson as the freak whirlpool that had appeared out of nowhere and dragged them off course. Her log pose was spinning uselessly on her wrist, its needle going haywire. This part of the Grand Line wasn't on any of her charts. The sea, the sky, the very air felt wrong, charged with a hostile energy she had never encountered. "Nami." Luffy's voice was a reassuring anchor in the chaos. He was braced at the prow, his straw hat tied securely under his chin, a look of grim determination on his face. "Where do we steer?" "There's nowhere to go," she yelled back, wrestling with the wheel as a colossal wave slammed into their port side. The Sunny groaned under the impact, timbers creaking in protest. Chopper let out a terrified shriek as he slid across the deck. Nami scanned the maelstrom, her navigator's instincts screaming at her. There was no pattern, no lull, no escape. It wasn't a weather system, it was an attack. The sea itself was trying to kill them. Another wave, even larger than the last, rose before them, a towering wall of black water crowned with frothing red lightning. It blotted out the sky. "Everyone, grab something," Zoro shouted, his hand already on his swords. Nami had a split second to see the horror on her crewmates' faces before the wave crashed down. The world became a violent, suffocating explosion of water and pressure. Her hands were ripped from the helm, and the last thing she felt was a brutal impact against her head before the black water dragged her into its cold, silent embrace. The next morning, Naruto woke up with a groan. His head felt fuzzy, and for a moment, he couldn't place the strange sense of contentment that suffused his body. It felt like he'd had the best night's sleep of his life. He stretched, his muscles feeling loose and powerful, and rolled out of bed. The weirdness started as soon as he opened his door. His neighbor, an old woman who usually just gave him a curt nod, was waiting in the hallway. Her face broke into a wide, adoring smile, her cheeks flushing a startling shade of pink. "Good morning, Naruto-sama," she chirped, her voice several octaves higher than usual. "I made too many rice balls this morning. Please, you must have them." She thrust a neatly wrapped bento box into his hands. Thanks, Oba-san," he said, bewildered. She practically skipped away, humming. Naruto stared at the bento, then shrugged and headed for his favorite breakfast spot. The walk to Ichiraku Ramen was a surreal experience. People didn't just greet him, they stopped and stared. Women blushed and giggled behind their hands. Men slapped him on the back with a little too much enthusiasm, their eyes shining with something that looked like hero worship cranked up to 1,000. Even the kids, who usually just saw him as the goofy orange-clad guy, watched him with wide, reverent eyes. He'd gotten used to being recognized, to being respected. This was different. This felt sticky, unearned. When he ducked under the flaps of Ichiraku, Tsuki gave him a booming welcome, but it was Ayame who nearly dropped a bowl of noodles. Her eyes went wide, and a deep blush spread across her face. Naruto, welcome," she stammered, frantically wiping down a spot at the counter that was already spotless. "What can I get for you?" "Anything. It's on the house. For you, everything is always on the house." Naruto blinked. "Just the usual miso pork, Ayame-chan. And you don't have to do that." No, I insist," she said, her voice breathy. She practically floated to the kitchen, her gaze fixed on him the entire time. He ate his ramen under the weight of her intense, unwavering stare. It was unsettling. He was used to people seeing him as a hero, a friend, a rival, even a monster. He wasn't used to being looked at like he was the sun itself. It made his skin crawl. He finished his noodles in record time, paid despite Ayame's protests, and fled the restaurant. Something was definitely wrong. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the world felt tilted on its axis, and he was the center of its strange new gravity. Deciding he needed to escape the suffocating adoration of the village, he headed for the training grounds near the coast, hoping a long walk and some fresh sea air would clear his head. Pain was the first thing Nami registered. A dull, throbbing ache in her head and a sharp, stinging sensation along her arms and back. She coughed, expelling a lungful of saltwater, and pushed herself onto her hands and knees. She was on a beach. The sand was soft and white, littered with unfamiliar shells. A dense, dark forest stood behind her, and the sea that had tried to kill her was now startlingly calm, its waters a placid turquoise. There was no sign of the Sunny. No sign of her crew. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog in her head. Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, she screamed, her voice hoarse. The only answer was the gentle lapping of the waves and the cry of a distant seabird. Panic began to set in, but she ruthlessly shoved it down. A navigator who panicked was a dead navigator. She forced herself to take stock. She was alive. She had a few scrapes and a nasty bump on her head, but she was functional. Her klima tact was still strapped to her thigh, its segments seemingly intact. She checked her wrist. The log pose's needle was spinning in frantic, useless circles. She stood up, her legs shaky, and scanned the horizon. In the distance, rising above the treeline, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Carved into the face of a massive cliff were four colossal stone faces, staring out with a silent, stoic authority. It was a landmark so bizarre, so unnatural, it could only be from some uncharted island in the New World. She was alone, shipwrecked in a place that didn't exist on any map. A shiver of despair ran through her, but she clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She had survived Arlong. She had survived Enel. She had survived years of thieving and fighting and clawing her way through the world. She would survive this. She would find her crew, and she would get the hell off this island. First things first, she needed information, and maybe fresh water. Taking a deep breath, she started walking along the coastline, her eyes scanning for any sign of life, any clue as to where in the world she was. The sea air did little to calm Naruto's nerves. If anything, the solitude made the morning's strangeness stand out even more. He felt like he was in a play where everyone but him had been given a new script. He kicked at a piece of driftwood, sending it skittering across the sand. It was then that he saw her. A splash of vibrant orange hair against the blue-green of the sea. She was standing at the water's edge, staring out at the ocean with a fierce, desperate intensity. She was dressed in little more than a bikini top and low-slung jeans, clothes that were completely alien to the land of fire. Scrapes and bruises marred her tanned skin, and she held herself with a tense, defensive posture. Concern immediately overrode his own confusion. She looked lost and hurt. He started towards her, his footsteps silent on the sand. "Hey, are you okay?" he called out when he was a few yards away. Nami spun around, her hand immediately flying to the weapon strapped to her thigh. Her brown eyes were wide and sharp, filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. She took in the sight of him. The bright orange jumpsuit, the spiky blonde hair, the whiskered marks on his cheeks, and her defensive stance hardened. He was just as strange as the island itself. But as he got closer, a weird thing happened. The fear that had been a cold knot in her stomach seemed to loosen. The man, approaching her, had the most stunningly blue eyes she had ever seen, and they were filled with a genuine, disarming warmth. His smile was easy and bright, and for a ridiculous, fleeting moment, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was a feeling of safety, of trust, so potent and so sudden that it immediately set off every alarm bell in her head. "No one is that trustworthy," a cynical voice in her mind hissed. "It's a trick. It's always a trick." Naruto felt his new, unwelcome power flare as he looked at her. He saw the flicker of apprehension in her eyes melt away, replaced by something softer. He saw the tension in her shoulders ease. It was the same reaction everyone else had been having all morning, but seeing it on this stranger's face felt different. It felt wrong. He instinctively tried to suppress it, to pull back the cloying, unnatural charm he was somehow projecting. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice softer than he intended. The spell broke. Nami's eyes narrowed again, her suspicion returning with a vengeance. That feeling, it wasn't natural. It was like a cheap hypnotist's trick, and she had spent too long dealing with pirates and charlatans to fall for it. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the strange warmth he seemed to exude. Naruto was taken aback. She was the first person all day who hadn't immediately fallen into a state of doe-eyed adoration. Her wariness was a splash of cold, refreshing water. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki," he said, offering a small, more genuine smile this time. "You look like you've been through a lot. What happened?" Nami studied him, her mind racing. He didn't seem like a marine. He didn't look like a pirate or a bounty hunter, either. His clothes were bizarre, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence. A power that was evident even when he was standing still. And despite her deep-seated suspicion, she couldn't detect any malice from him. Just an unnerving, almost supernatural charisma. "My ship was wrecked in a storm," she said, deciding a partial truth was the safest bet. "I washed up here." Where is this place?" "You're just outside Konohagakure, in the land of fire," Naruto replied, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Have you never heard of it?" She shook her head. Never. The name meant nothing to her. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise. To have never heard of one of the 5 great shinobi villages was unheard of. Just how far had she come from? He looked her over again, at her strange clothes and the weird, 3-part staff on her leg. She was an enigma, a beautiful, fiery, and deeply suspicious enigma, and for some reason, he felt an overwhelming urge to help her, an urge that felt entirely his own, separate from the strange influence clinging to him. "Look," he said, taking a half step back to give her space. "You're hurt. You can't stay out here. My village is just over that hill. We have doctors, food, a place you can rest and figure things out. I promise, you'll be safe there." Nami hesitated. Every instinct she had screamed at her not to trust strangers, especially ones who made her feel so strangely off balance. But she was also a pragmatist. She was alone, injured, and in a completely unknown land. Refusing help out of sheer pride would be stupid. This Naruto Uzumaki might be her only chance of finding her crew. "All right," she said slowly, her hand never straying far from her klima tact. "I'll go with you, but if you try anything funny, I'll shock you so hard your hair will stand up for a month." Naruto let out a laugh, a loud, genuine bark of amusement. The threat, and the fierce look in her eyes, was the most normal thing he'd experienced all day. "It's a deal." He turned to lead the way, and as he did, he caught his reflection in a shallow tide pool. For a terrifying, heart-stopping instant, the reflection wasn't his. The eyes in the water glowed with a malevolent crimson light, and the smiling face twisted into a hungry, predatory leer. A faint whisper, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, echoed in the back of his mind. So bright, such a feast. He blinked, shaking his head hard, and his reflection returned to normal. The voice was gone. He stood frozen for a second, a cold dread seeping into his bones. What was happening to him? "Hey, are you coming or what?" Nami's sharp voice cut through his panic. He glanced back at her. She was watching him, her expression a mixture of impatience and a sliver of concern. Her presence was a grounding force, a puzzle that distracted him from the one raging inside himself. "Yeah," he said, forcing a smile. "Sorry, let's go." As they walked towards the massive gates of Konoha, Nami staring in bewildered awe at the sheer scale of the village walls, Naruto W. as left grappling with 2 equally unsettling mysteries. The first was the beautiful, sharp-witted woman who, for some reason, seemed immune to the strange charm that had infected him. The second was the chilling fear that the power he now wielded wasn't his own, and that its true owner was watching him from somewhere deep in the shadows of his soul. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Fox and the Navigator. The gate to Konohagakure was immense, a towering wooden barrier that spoke of a village built to withstand sieges. To Nami, it looked like a fortress. As they approached, 2 shinobi in standard green flak vests, who had been lounging in a guard post, snapped to attention. Their eyes landed on Naruto, and their professional demeanor instantly dissolved into something bordering on reverence. "Naruto-sama, welcome back," one of them said, bowing far deeper than was necessary. "We trust your morning has been pleasant." Nami's eyebrows shot up. "Sama." It was a level of respect she'd only ever heard used for kings or the most legendary figures. These guards weren't just respecting a hero, they were fawning over him. Everything's fine, Kotetsu, Naruto said, a note of weariness in his voice that Nami was beginning to recognize. This is a friend. She's shipwrecked and needs medical attention. Can you let us through? Of course. For you, Naruto-sama, anything. The other guard, Azumo, replied, practically tripping over himself to open the gate. Nami watched the exchange with a hawk-like intensity. The guards barely gave her a second glance. Their entire focus was on Naruto, their expressions a mixture of awe and an almost puppy-like devotion. She had seen the effects of charisma before. Luffy possessed a natural, magnetic charm that drew people to him. But this was different. This was a targeted, overwhelming force that seemed to bypass reason entirely. And from the tense set of Naruto's shoulders, it was clear he was just as uncomfortable with it as she was. As they stepped into the village proper, Nami's breath caught in her throat. It was a sprawling, vibrant city, a bustling metropolis of traditional wooden buildings, winding streets, and a populace that moved with a quiet, disciplined energy. Everyone, from the shopkeepers sweeping their stoops to the children chasing each other through the alleys, wore the same leaf-emblazoned forehead protector. It was a symbol of unity, of a shared identity that was both fascinating and slightly intimidating. Her thief's mind automatically began mapping the layout, noting the sightlines, the rooftops that formed a secondary highway, the strategic choke points. Her navigator's heart, however, was simply stunned by the sheer, stable permanence of the place. But the oddness continued. As Naruto led her through the main thoroughfare, a ripple of adoration followed them. People stopped what they were doing to stare, their faces breaking into beatific smiles. Whispers followed them, not of gossip, but of pure, unadulterated praise. It's Naruto-sama, he's even more radiant today. Did you see his smile? It's like the sun itself. Naruto's own smile was strained. He walked faster, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Don't mind them, he muttered, his voice low. They're just friendly. Nami countered, her voice equally quiet. They look like they're about to start a religion with you as the main deity. He shot her a sideways glance, a flicker of gratitude in his impossibly blue eyes. It was the look of a man who was glad someone else finally saw that the world had gone mad. Something like that, he sighed. The hospital is just up ahead. Konoha General Hospital was a clean, orderly building humming with quiet efficiency. The moment they walked through the doors, a pink-haired woman in a medical uniform looked up from her clipboard. Her green eyes widened, and the professional calm on her face instantly shattered. Naruto, she exclaimed, a blush rising on her cheeks. What are you doing here? Are you hurt? She rushed over, her hands fluttering near his shoulders as if she wanted to check him for injuries but didn't dare touch him. I'm fine, Sakura-chan, Naruto said, managing a more natural smile for her. This is, he faltered, realizing he didn't know her name. Nami, she supplied, her eyes flicking between Naruto and the flustered medic. This woman's reaction was the most telling yet. Her body language screamed of a deep, pre-existing relationship, but her current behavior was that of a star-struck teenager. Right, Nami, Naruto continued. She was in a shipwreck. Washed up on the coast. Can you check her out? She took a pretty nasty bump to the head. Of course, anything for a friend of yours, Naruto. Sakura said, her voice filled with a disturbingly cheerful energy. She led Nami into an examination room, her movements efficient but her eyes repeatedly straying back to Naruto. Nami submitted to the examination, her mind whirring. The medic, Sakura, was skilled. Her hands were gentle but firm as she treated the cuts and scrapes, her medical ninjutsu casting a warm, green glow that knitted the skin back together with an astonishing speed. But the entire time, she kept asking questions about Naruto. How did they meet? What was he like? Was he as brave and kind as everyone said? It was an interrogation disguised as a friendly chat. He seems popular, Nami said, testing the waters. Sakura let out a soft, dreamy sigh. He's the hero of the entire world. He deserves all the love and respect we can give him. She finished wrapping a bandage around Nami's head. There, you're lucky. No serious concussion. You should be fine. Just take it easy for a day or two. While Nami was being treated, Naruto found Kakashi and Shikamaru in the Hokage's administrative office. He'd sent a clone ahead to summon them, a trick that still felt wonderfully efficient. A shipwrecked girl from a place called the New World, Shikamaru said, leaning back in his chair with his hands laced behind his head. He had a map of their known continent spread across the desk. And this map she has doesn't match any of our charts. What a drag. Her story is strange, Kakashi added, his single visible eye crinkling in thought. But what's stranger is you, Naruto. There's something different about your chakra. It's always been bright, like a sun. Now it's fragrant. Naruto ran a hand through his hair in frustration. That's the other thing I wanted to talk about. Ever since that red meteor last night, everyone's been acting weird around me. Super weird. Ayame tried to give me free ramen for life. Old Lady Chio gave me her lunch, and the guards bowed to me like I'm the first Hokage. It's not just respect, it's more. And I feel it, too. This weird warmth inside me. When I look at people, I can almost nudge them. It's freaking me out. Shikamaru sat up, his lazy expression sharpening into one of intense focus. Nudge them how? I don't know how to explain it, Naruto said, pacing the room. It's like, I can feel what they're feeling, and I can make it stronger. Make their goodwill towards me overwhelming. The girl, Nami, she's the only one who seems to be able to shake it off. Kakashi stroked his chin. A power of influence, or seduction. That's not a keke genkai I've ever heard of. This is beyond troublesome. It could be a new, delayed onset genjutsu of some kind. It doesn't feel like a genjutsu, Naruto insisted. It feels like a part of me. And I don't like it. Just then, Nami walked into the office, Sakura trailing behind her like a loyal shadow. She nodded a curt thanks to the medic and turned her sharp gaze on the three men. I'm fine, she announced, cutting straight to the point. Now, I need to find my crew. You said this was the land of fire. Show me on a map. Shikamaru gestured to the chart on his desk. Nami leaned over it, her brow furrowed in concentration. After a long, silent moment, she straightened up, a grim look on her face. None of this is right, she said, her voice tight with suppressed anxiety. The coastlines, the continents, it's all wrong. It's like I'm in another world. The room fell silent. Kakashi exchanged a look with Shikamaru. The idea of other dimensions wasn't fantasy. Kagaya's abilities had proven that, but the practical implications were staggering. Okay, Nami said, taking a deep, steadying breath. She was a woman who thrived in chaos, whose mind worked best when the stakes were highest. Plan B. I washed ashore on the east coast. My crew could have been scattered anywhere by the storm. The currents in that storm were unnatural. They might have been pushed inland. I need to retrace my steps, look for any signs of them or our ship. Naruto nodded immediately. I'll go with you. You've done enough, Nami said, crossing her arms. I can handle myself. I'm sure you can, Naruto replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. But I know this land. You don't. You'll cover more ground with me. A tense moment passed between them. Nami searched his eyes for any sign of that cloying, unnatural charm. She found it, a faint shimmer deep within their blue depths, but it was overshadowed by a genuine, stubborn desire to help. It was that sincerity that convinced her. Fine, she conceded, but you slow me down, I'm leaving you behind. The forest that bordered the coast was dense and ancient, a sea of green shadows and dappled sunlight. As they walked, a comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the crunch of leaves under their boots and the distant cry of birds. Naruto led the way, pointing out edible plants and warning her about which streams were safe to drink from. Nami, in turn, showed him how to read the subtle signs of the environment, a broken branch, a patch of disturbed soil, that might indicate someone had passed by. They moved well together, his raw power and stamina complemented by her keen, analytical mind. So, Nami said, acting the silence as they paused for a drink of water. You're the hero of the world. What does that even mean? Naruto shrugged, a little embarrassed. There was a war, a big one. I helped end it. You fought in a war. She looked at him, really looked at him. Despite his easy smile and goofy clothes, she could see it now. The faint scars, the watchfulness in his eyes, the way he carried himself like a weapon that was always ready. Yeah, he said simply. My dream is to be the leader of my village, the Hokage. To protect everyone. Sometimes, that means fighting. My dream is to draw a map of the entire world, Nami said. A flicker of passion in her eyes. To see everything, to chart the unknown. To be free. Naruto smiled. Those are pretty good dreams. He found himself genuinely drawn to her. She was sharp, resilient, and utterly unimpressed by his hero status or his bizarre new power. She saw him, not the icon the village was turning him into. The feeling was a relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. They continued their search, their conversation flowing more easily now. He told her about his friends, about his sensei, about his long, hard climb from being the Yaj outcast to its celebrated champion. She, in turn, told him about her crew, her found family of misfits. She spoke of a rubber captain with an infectious laugh, a stoic swordsman who always got lost. A chivalrous cook with a fiery temper, and a long-nosed liar who told the bravest stories. As she spoke, her face softened, her love for them shining through her tough exterior. Their trek was interrupted by the sudden appearance of 4 rough-looking men stepping out from behind the ancient trees. They were Ronin, masterless samurai, their kimonos stained and their swords worn. Their eyes hungry as they looked Nami up and down. Well, the leader sneered, showing a row of yellowed teeth. What's a pretty little thing like you doing all the way out here with this orange thing? Naruto stepped in front of her protectively. Just keep walking, he said, his voice dangerously calm. We don't want any trouble. Oh, I think we do, the Ronin chuckled, drawing his katana. His companions did the same, fanning out to surround them. Nami's hand went to her klima tact. I can handle these guys, she muttered to Naruto. I know, he replied, his eyes fixed on the Ronin. But let me try something. Before Nami could protest, Naruto closed his eyes for a second, focusing inward. He reached for that warm, pleasant energy that had been clinging to him all day. But instead of letting it wash out of him aimlessly, he gathered it, shaped it. He didn't want to command or control. He just wanted to persuade. He opened his eyes. The blue in them seemed to deepen, to glow with an inner light. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flood the area with killing intent. He simply looked at the 4 men and let that energy flow towards them, carrying a single, simple idea. You're tired, Naruto said. His voice calm and reasonable, yet it carried an impossible weight. It's been a long day. This armor is heavy, your swords are heavy, fighting is so much work. Don't you think it would be better to just go find a nice, shady spot and take a nap? A strange, glazed look came over the Ronins' faces. The leader blinked, looking down at his own sword as if seeing it for the first time. It did feel heavy, impossibly heavy. His shoulders ached. The thought of fighting, of swinging that blade, suddenly seemed like the most exhausting, pointless thing in the world. A nap, on the other hand, a nap sounded wonderful. He's right, one of the others mumbled, his katana sagging in his grip. So tired, another agreed, yawning widely. With a collective clatter, the 4 Ronin dropped their swords. They looked at Naruto, their expressions not of fear, but of profound gratitude, as if he had just revealed a great truth to them. They gave him a simultaneous, clumsy bow and then wandered off into the woods. Their movements slow and lethargic, like men walking in a dream. Nami stared, her jaw slack. Her klima tact was still in her hand, half assembled. She hadn't even had time to create a mirage. One moment, they were about to be attacked. The next, the attackers had been talked into taking a nap. It wasn't a genjutsu. There were no hand signs, no surge of chakra she could detect. It wasn't brute force. It was a suggestion. A suggestion they had been physically unable to refuse. She turned to Naruto, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and a deep, chilling fear. What did you just do? Before Naruto could answer, a loud, familiar shout echoed through the trees. Nami-ei. Nami's head snapped up, a wave of pure, unadulterated joy washing away her fear. Luffy, she screamed back, breaking into a run. They burst into a clearing to find him. Luffy was there, his signature straw hat on his head, looking completely unharmed. Zoro was leaning against a tree, arms crossed, looking as bored and imposing as ever. And Sanji, Sanji was in the middle of lighting a cigarette, his face a picture of cool relief until he saw Naruto emerge from the forest behind his beloved Nami. The cigarette fell from his lips. "Nami Swan, you're safe," he cried, his body contorting into a love-fueled noodle as he rushed towards her. He skidded to a halt, showering her with praise and relief. Before his single visible eye swiveled to Naruto. The love-struck expression vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory glare. "And who?" Sanji said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, "is this?" Without waiting for an answer, his right leg ignited, flames swirling around his black dress shoe. "Keep your filthy hands off my Nami Swan, you whiskered bastard!" he roared, launching himself through the air in a devastating arc kick aimed directly at Naruto's head. Naruto's eyes widened. He had just faced down four-armed samurai without throwing a punch, only to be met with the full, fiery wrath of a lovesick pirate cook. His strange, new day had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Weaver. The world exploded in a blur of black cloth and searing flame. Sanji's kick was a thing of brutal elegance, a fiery arc that cut through the air with a vicious hiss. To Nami, it seemed instantaneous and unstoppable. She had seen that K shatter boulders and send armored giants flying. But Naruto wasn't a boulder. He didn't block. He didn't counter. He simply moved. One moment he was standing in the kick's path. The next, he was 2 feet to the left. His hands still casually tucked in his pockets. The flaming boot scythed through the space where his head had been, the heat of its passage ruffling his blonde hair. Sanji landed with the grace of a cat, spinning on the ball of his foot, his expression of shock quickly morphing back into a mask of cold fury. "Ho, you're fast," Sanji growled, smoke curling from the sole of his shoe. "But you can't dodge forever." Luffy, who had been about to greet Nami, let out a delighted laugh. "Awesome. He's strong. Let me fight him." A sharp, painful lump erupted on Luffy's head as Nami's fist connected with his skull. An identical one appeared on Sanji's. "Stop it, you idiots!" she roared, her face contorted in a rage that was far more terrifying than Sanji's flaming kick. "This is the person who saved me. And you immediately try to kick his head off." "But Nami Swan," Sanji protested, clutching his head with a pained, lovesick expression. "He was with you, alone, in the forest. A man, with you. He helped me look for you." She shot back. "Exactly. He was trying to get on your good side." Naruto watched the exchange with a bewildered expression. The sheer, chaotic energy of this group was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Even Team 7 at its most dysfunctional had never operated with this level of violent, familial insanity. "She's right, you know," Zoro said, his voice a lazy drawl. He hadn't moved from his spot by the tree, but his hand was resting on the hilt of his Wado Ikimonji. His eye was fixed on Naruto, not with Sanji's jealous rage, but with the keen, calculating gaze of a predator sizing up another. "You can't just attack every stranger we meet, Arrow Cook." "Shut up, Marimo," Sanji snapped, the vein in his temple pulsing. "You're just too dumb to see the obvious threat. The only threat I see is your stupid, curly eyebrow." As the two of them squared off, growling insults at each other, Naruto stepped forward. "Look, I don't want any trouble," he said, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. Nami washed up on the coast alone. I was just helping her search for you guys." Luffy, rubbing the lump on his head, bounced over to him. His earlier animosity completely forgotten. He peered at Naruto's face, his head tilted. "You have whiskers. Are you a fox?" No, it's a long story," Naruto replied, taken aback by the boy's directness. Luffy broke into a wide, infectious grin. "I'm Monkey D. Luffy, the man who's gonna be king of the pirates." He stuck out his hand. Naruto blinked, then grinned back, the tension in his shoulders easing. He shook Luffy's hand firmly. "Nice to meet you." The moment their hands clasped, a palpable sense of unease washed over the clearing. It was a subtle shift at first, like a cloud passing over the sun. The cheerful birdsong in the trees fell silent. The warm, humid air grew cold, clinging to their skin with a damp, clammy chill. A faint, unpleasant smell, like rotting leaves and stagnant water, permeated the air. Naruto felt it first, a prickle on the back of his neck. The strange, seductive energy within him recoiled, like an animal sensing a predator. Kurama stirred, a low, guttural growl echoing in the back of his mind. Kit, something is here, something foul. Nami felt it too, a sudden drop in barometric pressure that her navigator's senses screamed was unnatural. What is this? She whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. The joyful relief of finding her crew was draining away, replaced by a creeping, baseless dread. Luffy's smile vanished. Zoro's hand tightened on his sword. His lazy demeanor gone, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. Sanji stopped bickering with Zoro, his head snapping up, sniffing the air like a hound. This feeling, Zoro muttered. I've felt it before, on Thriller Bark. It's like all the hope is being sucked out of the world. The despair intensified, pressing down on them with a physical weight. Plants around the clearing began to droop and wither, their vibrant greens fading to a sickly, desiccated brown. The very light seemed to dim, the afternoon sun losing its warmth. Then they saw him. He hadn't been there a second ago. He stood at the edge of the clearing, a tall, gaunt figure draped in robes the color of a faded bruise. His skin was the pale, bloodless white of a corpse, and his face was a featureless oval of smooth flesh, devoid of eyes, nose, or mouth. He seemed to absorb the light around him, a small pocket of absolute shadow in the dying forest. What is that thing? Nami breathed, her voice trembling. The creature's head tilted, an impossibly slow, deliberate motion. Though it had no face, they all felt its attention land squarely on Naruto. A voice echoed in their minds, a dry, sibilant why. Spur that sounded like 1,000 insects scrabbling over parchment. Bright, so very, very bright. The master's seed has blossomed beautifully. Naruto felt a jolt of icy fear. This creature knew. It knew about the power inside him. Who are you? He demanded, stepping forward, his body instinctively shifting into a low, combat-ready stance. I am a harvester, the voice whispered. I have come to sample the crop. The creature paid Naruto no further mind. It turned its blank face towards the direction of a small farming settlement they had passed on their way. This land is fertile. The emotions are simple, pure. A fine appetizer before the main course. With a movement that was both graceful and utterly sickening, the creature sank into its own shadow on the ground and vanished. The oppressive aura of despair lingered for a moment, then began to drift away, flowing like a river in the direction the creature had faced. It's heading for the village. Naruto yelled, already starting to run. What was that thing? Luffy asked, his expression grim. It felt yucky. Whatever it was, it's bad news, Zoro said, drawing two of his swords. Let's go, Nami commanded, her own fear eclipsed by a fierce, protective anger. No one messes with innocent people on our watch. They were a whirlwind of motion, a strange alliance of orange, green, and black, dashing through the withering forest. Naruto, powered by his own chakra and Kurama's, was a blur of speed, but he was shocked to see the Straw Hats keeping pace with him. The rubber boy launched himself through the trees like a cannonball. The swordsman ran with the power of a locomotive, and the cook's legs propelled him with explosive force. Even Nami, who was by all accounts a normal human, moved with an agility and endurance that would put most Chunin to shame. They reached the farming settlement in minutes, but they were already too late. The place was silent, not peaceful, but dead. The vibrant fields of crops were brown and wilted. The few animals in their pens lay on their sides, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. And the people, the villagers were standing or sitting exactly where they had been when the harvester had arrived. A woman stood with a basket of laundry, her arms limp at her sides, her eyes vacant. A man sat on his porch, a woodworking tool lying forgotten in his lap. Children stood in the middle of a game, their faces slack and empty. They were all still alive, but their life force, their spirit, their very will to exist, had been siphoned away. They were hollow shells. In the center of the village square stood the harvester. A faint, shimmering aura of light was flowing from each of the villagers into the creature, which seemed to swell with power, its featureless face glowing with a faint inner luminescence. Stop it, Naruto roared, forming a Rasengan in his palm, the spiraling ball of chakra a stark contrast to the lifelessness surrounding them. He charged. The harvester turned its blank face to him, and the whisper echoed in their minds once more. So eager. The master was wise to choose a vessel with such passion. The harvester raised a single, long-fingered hand. The hollowed-out villagers, all of them, turned in unison. Their empty eyes locked onto Naruto and the straw hats, and with a collective, soulless groan, they began to shamble forward. Their movements were clumsy, but they moved with a singular, unnerving purpose. "Don't hurt them," Naruto yelled, dissipating his Rasengan. "They're still alive. They're being controlled. TCH. This is a pain," Zoro grumbled. "Flip. Ping his swords to use their blunt hilts." He and Sanji moved like a well-oiled machine, weaving through the crowd of listless villagers, striking with precise, non-lethal blows to their joints and pressure points, disabling them without causing serious injury. Luffy stretched his arms, grabbing villagers and wrapping them in his rubbery limbs, pulling them out of the fight and piling them up in a confused, twitching heap. "This is tricky," he grunted. While the Straw Hats dealt with the puppets, Naruto confronted the master. He charged again, this time relying on pure taijutsu. His fist flew towards the creature's head, a punch that could shatter steel. But his fist passed straight through its head as if it were smoke. Naruto stumbled, his momentum carrying him past the creature. He spun around, disbelief on his face. "Physical attacks are irrelevant," the harvester whispered, a note of amusement in its tone. "I am a concept, a hunger. You cannot punch a shadow." The harvester retaliated. It didn't attack, not in a physical sense. It simply focused its aura on Naruto. A wave of absolute, crushing despair washed over him, 100 times more potent than what they had felt in the clearing. It was a poison for the soul. It dredged up every failure, every moment of loneliness, every ounce of pain he had ever felt in his life. The scorn of the villagers in his childhood, Jiraiya's death, the burden of the world on his shoulders, it all came rushing back, amplified and overwhelming. His knees buckled, and he gasped, clutching his head as the psychic assault threatened to drown him. "Yes, give me your pain. Your fear," the harvester's voice hissed in his mind. "It is delicious." "Naruto," Nami screamed, seeing him falter. Her voice cut through the fog of despair. He looked up, his vision swimming, and saw her. Saw Luffy and Zoro and Sanji, fighting to protect people they didn't even know, fighting to protect him. The sight of their struggle, their unwavering will, was an anchor in the storm of psychic misery. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself back to his feet, the nine tails potent, angry chakra burning away the worst of the despair. "You talk too much," Naruto growled. He began flashing through hand signs. Fire style. Fireball jutsu. He spewed a massive torrent of flame from his mouth. The fireball engulfed the harvester, but just like his punch, it did nothing. The creature stood in the heart of the inferno, unharmed. "Your energy is impressive," it whispered as the flames died down. "But you do not understand its purpose. The master chose you, little fox. He planted a seed of his own divine essence within you. That power you feel, that unnatural charm that makes the world bend to your will, that is his gift to you." The words hit Naruto like a physical blow. The crimson meteor, the strange warmth, the way everyone had been acting. It was all a gift. "A gift to fatten you up," the harvester continued, its telepathic voice dripping with a cold, cosmic malice. "Your power makes others adore you. Their love, their devotion, their worship, all of it is emotional energy that your new power cultivates and refines. You are a garden, little fox, and the master is merely waiting for the harvest. He will consume you, and with you, the cultivated emotions of your entire world." Naruto stared in horror. His power wasn't his. It was a parasite, a leash. He was being raised like livestock for some god-level entity. The disgust and violation he felt were so profound, they momentarily overshadowed the despair. The harvester, sensing its victory, began to draw more power from the villagers. Its form shimmering. The Straw Hats were starting to get overwhelmed by the sheer number of mindless bodies. Naruto looked at the scene, at the empty shells of the villagers. At his new allies fighting a losing battle, at the creature that was feeding on their very souls. His Rasengan couldn't touch it. His jutsu was useless. Physical force was irrelevant. But the creature fed on emotion, on despair. So what if he fed it something else? Something it couldn't digest. He had to use it. The cursed gift. Not to charm, not to persuade, but to attack. He closed his eyes, shutting out the sight of the battle. He focused inward, past Kurama's rage, past his own chakra, and touched the warm, seductive energy that had been coiled inside him. He didn't just touch it. He grabbed it, seized control of it with every ounce of his indomitable will. He would not be a garden. He would be a weapon. He opened his eyes, and they were no longer just blue. They were glowing with an almost unbearable light, a hypnotic, captivating brilliance. He pushed the power outward, not as a gentle wave of warmth, but as a tidal wave of pure, concentrated, weaponized emotion. It wasn't love or adoration. It was something simpler, more primal. It was pure, unadulterated euphoria. The energy washed over the battlefield. It didn't touch the straw hats, who were shielded by their own fierce wills. But it slammed into the mindless villagers. Their shambling halted. The vacant expressions on their faces were replaced by looks of sudden, shocking bliss. Their eyes widened, and wide. Ecstatic smiles spread across their faces. They were flooded with a joy so potent, so overwhelming, it completely short-circuited the harvester's control. They were no longer puppets of despair. They were now disciples of ecstasy. And they all turned to face the harvester. The creature recoiled, its blank face for the first time projecting a sense of confusion and alarm. The villagers, chattering with joyous, nonsensical laughter, began to swarm it. They weren't attacking. They were trying to embrace it, to share the wonderful, incredible feeling that had just been gifted to them. No, the harvester's voice shrieked in their minds, laced with panic. This energy, it is corrupt, false. It has no nutritional value. The villagers, powered by Naruto's projected euphoria, were now a chaotic mob of happiness. They grabbed onto the harvester's smoky form, their artificial joy pouring into it like a poison. The creature that fed on despair was being force-fed a diet of pure, weaponized bliss. It was like trying to drown a fish in sand. The harvester let out a psychic scream of agony and revulsion. Its form began to flicker and destabilize, unable to process the corrupted emotional energy. The master will know of this. The harvest will come. You cannot escape your purpose, vessel. With a final, desperate shriek, the harvester's form imploded, dissolving into a cloud of black dust that was quickly scattered by the wind. The moment it was gone, Naruto's projection ceased. The villagers collapsed, the artificial euphoria vanishing as quickly as it had come. They lay on the ground, unconscious but safe. Their own life force slowly, weakly beginning to return to them. The clearing was silent again, save for the heavy breathing of the straw hats. They stared at the scene, then at Naruto. Their expressions a stunned mixture of relief, awe, and a profound, newfound fear. They had witnessed something beyond comprehension. Not a battle of fists, but a battle of wills, a battle of concepts. And Naruto had won. He stood in the center of the fallen villagers, his body trembling, not from exhaustion, but from self-loathing. He looked down at his own hands, seeing not the fists of a hero, but the tools of a monster. He had reached into the minds of innocent people and controlled them, twisted their emotions into a weapon. The power was more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. He felt a gentle touch on his arm. He looked up to see Nami standing beside him. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with what she had just seen, but there was no fear in them. Not directed at him. There was only a deep, unnerving understanding. You saved them, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I used them, he whispered back, his voice hoarse. I controlled them. I'm no better than that thing. Don't be an idiot, she said, her grip on his arm tightening. A power is just a tool. It's not good or evil. I saw a monster try to destroy these people. And I saw you use a dangerous power to stop it. You made a choice. The right one. He looked into her sharp, intelligent eyes, searching for the revulsion he felt for himself. But he found none. He found only her unwavering, pragmatic resolve. He had been so focused on the origin of his power that he had forgotten the most important thing, his own will. She wasn't adoring him. She wasn't charmed. She was seeing the choice he made, the man behind the power. Her trust was an anchor, a small point of light in the horrifying new darkness that threatened to define him. He didn't know if he could ever truly control this gift, or if it would inevitably corrupt him as the harvester had promised. But as he stood there, surrounded by his strange new pirate allies, with a fiery navigator's hand on his arm, he knew one thing for certain. he wouldn't have to face it alone. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Strategic Heart. The euphoria faded, leaving behind an unnerving silence. The villagers lay scattered across the square like fallen puppets, their chests rising and falling in shallow, rhythmic breaths. Naruto stood amongst them, the phantom feeling of their collective minds still clinging to his senses. It felt like a stain. "They're alive," Chopper said, his voice a small note of medical certainty in the tense air. The rest of the Straw Hats, Usopp, Frankie, Robin, and Brook, had arrived minutes after the Harvester's defeat, drawn by the psychic scream and the unnatural stillness that followed. Now the full, bizarre contingent stood assembled, a cyborg, a reindeer doctor, and a living skeleton surveying the scene with wide eyes. Their energy is low, but it's stable. They're just exhausted on a spiritual level. Naruto flinched at the word spiritual. He had assaulted their spirits, violated their inner selves with a power he loathed. "That was a super unsettling power you've got there, Orange Bro," Frankie said, adjusting his sunglasses. There was no judgment in his voice, only a statement of fact. "Yo-ho-ho-ho. Indeed," Brook added with a clatter of his jaw. "To weaponize joy itself. My heart would pound with admiration, if I had one." Luffy, his usual grin replaced by a thoughtful frown, walked over to Naruto and clapped a hand on his shoulder. "That was weird, but you saved them. That makes you a good guy in my book. From now on, we're allies." The declaration was so simple, so straightforward, it cut through Naruto's self-recrimination. He looked at Luffy, then at the rest of the crew. They were looking at him not with fear or suspicion, but with a complex mixture of curiosity, respect, and a readiness for the next fight. They were pirates, outlaws, and misfits, and they understood a simple truth that the shinobi world often forgot. You fight with the weapons you have, not the ones you wish you had. "Allies," Naruto repeated, a small, weary smile touching his lips. "Okay, I can live with that." As Chopper and a hastily summoned team of Konoha medics tended to the villagers, Naruto led the Straw Hats back toward the village. The debriefing took place in the Hokage's office, a room that now felt far too small to contain the chaotic energy of the pirate crew. Kakashi sat behind his desk, his one eyeball eye scanning the assembled group with an unreadable expression. Shikamaru stood beside him, arms crossed, his brow furrowed in concentration. Naruto explained everything. He left nothing out. The Crimson Meteor, the unsettling charm, the Harvester's arrival, and its horrifying revelations. He detailed the creature's immunity to physical attacks and ninjutsu, and the terrible, final choice he had made to use the seductive power as a psychic weapon. "A parasitic entity from another dimension, which you call the Celestial Weaver," Shikamaru summarized, his voice grim. He began pacing the room. "It has bestowed upon you a power that cultivates emotional energy from those around you, which it intends to harvest by consuming you. This harvester was just a scout. This is profoundly troublesome." "Troublesome doesn't begin to cover it," Kakashi said, his fingers steepled before him. "We are facing an enemy that may not be bound by the physical laws of our world." It was Nico Robin who spoke next, her voice a calm, measured counterpoint to the rising tension. "In the seas I come from, there are ancient tales, myths whispered on forgotten islands. They speak of the hollow gods, or the celestial parasites. The stories vary, but the theme is consistent. A star falls, a champion rises, beloved by all. The champion's world flourishes with art and passion, an era of great feeling. Then, the hollow god returns and consumes the champion and the world's color, leaving behind a gray, lifeless husk." A deep chill settled over the room. Robin's myths gave a terrifying, historical context to the Harvester's threats. This wasn't a new phenomenon. It was a cycle, and Naruto was at its center. Nami, who had been listening intently, stepped forward, her expression sharp and analytical. "So this weaver is a predator. And its hunting method is to turn its prey into bait for more prey. It's not just attacking you," she said, her eyes locking with Naruto's. "It's using you to turn his whole world into its personal larder." Shikamaru stopped pacing and looked at Nami with a newfound respect. She had cut through the mythology and the strangeness to the core strategic truth. "Exactly. And that creates a political problem of the highest order. Naruto now possesses a power that can, in theory, influence anyone. Friends, enemies, cage. The weight of that final word hung in the air. We have to tell the other villages. Kakashi said, his voice firm. The harvester was just a scout. The next attack could be anywhere. We need the allied shinobi forces united. If this weaver is targeting the whole world must fight back. They'll never believe it, Shikamaru argued, running a hand through his spiky ponytail. The truth is insane. A mind-controlling hero, a god from another dimension. Pirates from another world. They're more likely to believe Naruto has been corrupted. They'll see him as the threat. They might move to contain him. Violently. It's a risk we have to take, Naruto said. His voice unwavering. The self-pity was gone, replaced by a familiar, stubborn resolve. This thing, this weaver, it picked the wrong world to mess with. And it picked the wrong guy to be its guardian. I'm not gonna run, and I'm not gonna hide. We tell them the truth. We fight this thing together. Kakashi looked at Naruto, a flicker of pride in his eye. He then looked at the Straw Hats. A collection of individuals so strange they defied categorization, yet they stood with Naruto, their loyalty unspoken but absolute. Shikamaru, the Hokage commanded, send the summons. An emergency 5-cage summit. Here, in Konoha. Tell them it concerns the fate of our world. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. As encrypted messages flew to the other great villages, Konoha transformed. The Anbu Black Ops moved like ghosts through the streets, their presence a constant, silent reminder of the gravity of the situation. The Straw Hats were given quarters near the Hokage's residence. A decision that caused no small amount of chaos. Sanji immediately tried to take over every kitchen in a 5-block radius. Zoro got lost on the way to the bathroom and ended up in the Hyuga clan compound. And Luffy attempted to climb the Hokage monument to get a better view. Amidst the chaos, an unlikely intellectual alliance formed. In the vast, scroll-filled depths of the Konoha archive, Shikamaru, Nami, and Robin spent hours hunched over ancient texts. Shikamaru, with his genius-level intellect, was the master strategist. Robin, with her encyclopedic knowledge of forgotten histories, was the researcher. And Nami, with her brilliant, pragmatic mind, was the analyst who connected the dots. This is a waste of time, Shikamaru grumbled on the second day, staring at a faded scroll describing ancient chakra theories. There's nothing in our history about anything like this weaver. You're looking for a shinobi, Robin corrected gently, her eyes scanning a different text. Think bigger. Look for a concept, a famine, a plague, an age of despair. Nami, who was poring over celestial charts and records of astronomical phenomena, suddenly pointed to a passage. Here, look, 2,000 years ago, an obscure text from the land of whirlpools, Uzumaki clan records. It describes an era of blissful madness that preceded the country's fall. It mentions a Krim, sun star, and a beloved prince who could end wars with a smile. After a generation of unparalleled peace and art under his rule, the records abruptly stop. The next entry, from a different scribe, simply describes a land of silent gray statues and a wind that carried no scent. Shikamaru and Robin froze, leaning in to read the passage. It was their first piece of concrete evidence. The pattern was identical. The crimson star, the beloved champion, the flourishing of emotion, followed by a silent, colorless end. It fed on them, Shikamaru whispered, a horrifying understanding dawning on him. The entire country. The day of the summit arrived under a tense, overcast sky. One by one, the cage arrived, their entourages a display of their village's unique power. Gaara of the Sand, his expression as serene and deadly as the desert itself. Darui of the Cloud, calm and collected, but with the power of a thunderstorm crackling just beneath the surface. Kuretsuchi of the Stone, her confident, almost arrogant smirk hiding a will as unbending as rock. And Chojuro of the Mist, his nervous demeanor belying his skill as one of the 7 swordsmen. They were escorted to the summit chamber, a secure, subterranean room built for just such an occasion. The tension was thick enough to cut with a kunai. The other cage had fought alongside Naruto in the war. They respected him, and Gaara considered him his closest friend. But they were also leaders, responsible for the lives of their people, and a summons this urgent could only mean a threat of the highest magnitude. They entered the amber to a sight that immediately put them on edge. Standing beside Kakashi and Naruto were not just Konoha's top advisors, but 9 of the most outlandish individuals they had ever seen. A man with a ridiculously long nose. A reindeer that walked on 2 legs. A giant man wearing only a speedo and an open shirt. A stoic woman with an unnerving calm. A cook with a swirling eyebrow. A green-haired wordsman who radiated pure killing intent. A living skeleton in a top hat, and a boy in a straw hat who was picking his nose. Kakashi, Kuretsuchi said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she took her seat. You throw a party and you don't invite us. I'm hurt. What is the meaning of this? Darui asked, his gaze lingering on Zoro. Who are these people? This feels dull already. Gaara said nothing, his seafoam green eyes moving from Naruto to Luffy, sensing a similar, undefinable spirit in both of them. Kakashi raised a hand for silence. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I assure you, the reason is more serious than any of us could have imagined. He took a deep breath. Our world is in danger. We are being targeted by an entity from beyond our reality. And the opening move of its attack was directed at the man who saved us all. All eyes turned to Naruto. He stood tall, his expression serious, the weight of his world and his curse settling on his shoulders. He met the gaze of each cage. Leaders he had fought beside, men and women he considered his comrades. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, Naruto began, his voice clear and strong, echoing in the silent chamber. But it's the truth, and if we don't face it together, there won't be a world left to protect. The great doors of the summit chamber swung shut, sealing them in. Outside, the Straw Hats and Naruto's friends waited. A strange, patchwork alliance standing vigil. In the sky above Konoha, the gray clouds began to swirl, and for a fleeting moment, a trick of the light or a figment of a paranoid imagination made it seem as though a single, vast, crimson eye was peering down from the heavens. The game had been set. The pieces were in place. And the heart of their world's strategy as about to be decided in the crucible of a single room. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Unwilling Champion. The heavy stone doors of the summit chamber swung open, releasing a wave of palpable tension into the hallway. The cage emerged, their faces grim masks of stone and steel. The impromptu audience of shinobi and pirates held their collective breath. The verdict was a stalemate, a fragile truce born of fear and uncertainty. Gaara, his loyalty to Naruto absolute, had argued fiercely in their favor. Kakashi had presented the evidence with calm, unassailable logic. But it wasn't enough. A tale of a parasitic god from another dimension, told to us by a man who suddenly has the power to make anyone his friend, Kuretsuchi, the Tsuchikage, had scoffed, her arms crossed. Forgive me if I don't immediately commit my forces to a bedtime story. Your skepticism is understandable, Kakashi had replied smoothly. But the evidence of the drained villagers is real. The threat is real. The TIC is a man with the potential to destabilize the entire political landscape. Darui, the Raikage, had countered, his voice a low rumble. How do we know you aren't already under his influence, Kakashi? How do we know we aren't? The feeling in this room is, oddly agreeable. It's unnerving. In the end, they had agreed to an intelligence-sharing pact. The allied shinobi forces would be placed on high alert. But they would not mobilize. Not yet. They were watching, waiting. Waiting for more proof, or waiting for Naruto to make one wrong move. He was no longer just their hero, he was a potential world-ending threat, a walking, talking WMD held in check only by his own character. It was an alliance built on a knife's edge. As the cage and their guards began the formal, tense process of departing, a commotion erupted from the village's main gate. It wasn't the sound of an attack, but a wave of joyous, almost ecstatic shouting that grew louder and louder, sweeping through the streets of Konoha like a wildfire. Naruto and the others moved to a balcony overlooking the main thoroughfare. The sight below was bizarre. The normally disciplined shinobi and villagers were crowded along the street, their faces alight with blissful adoration. They were cheering, throwing flowers, and weeping with joy. They were parting to make way for a single man who walked through their midst like a returning god. He was tall and unnervingly handsome, with silver hair that fell in a perfect, careless cascade around a face that could have been carved from marble. He wore loose, flowing robes of black and gold, and he moved with a languid, leonine grace. He smiled at the crowd, a lazy, indulgent smile that promised everything and demanded nothing, and the people swooned. He exuded an aura, a presence so powerful it was a physical force. A perfume of pure charisma. It was a mirror of Naruto's own power, but where Naruto's was a warm, inviting hearth, this man's was a hypnotic, decadent inferno. He stopped in the center of the square, his violet eyes scanning the adoring faces until they found the balcony. He looked past the shocked cage, past the bewildered straw hats, and his gaze locked onto Naruto. The indulgent smile widened into a grin of recognition, of shared, secret knowledge. "So," the man called out, his voice a smooth, melodious baritone that carried effortlessly over the adoring crowd. "You're the new one. A bit rustic, aren't you? But I can feel the master's gift in you. It sings." Naruto felt the power within him recoil, a snake recognizing a mongoose. This man was like him. "Who are you?" Naruto shouted down, his voice tight. "My name is Lysander," the man replied, performing a theatrical bow. "And like you, I am a champion. A beloved child of the great weaver. I've come a long, long way to meet my new little brother." Lysander took a step, and then another, walking on the air itself, ascending towards the balcony with an effortless grace that defied gravity. He landed before them as softly as a falling leaf, the adoring roar of the crowd below rising to a crescendo. "Please, control your people," Lysander said with a dismissive wave towards the street. "Their devotion is cloying. So unrefined." Naruto instinctively projected a wave of calming energy, not of euphoria, but of simple, focused duty. The effect was immediate. The villagers blinked, the blissful glaze in their eyes fading into confusion. They looked at their hands, at the flowers they had thrown, and then shuffled away, a collective blush of embarrassment coloring the entire village. Lysander watched, an appreciative glint in his violet eyes. "Oh, you have good control. Discipline. I can respect that. I, myself, have always preferred the more passionate expressions of faith." "What do you want?" Zoro asked, his hand already on his katanas, the only one in the immediate vicinity seemingly immune to Lysander's overwhelming presence. Lysander's gaze slid to Zoro, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Ah, a man with no room in his soul for anything but the blade. You must be very boring at parties." He turned his attention back to Naruto. "What do I want? I want to welcome you to the family, of course. To show you the true joy of the gift you've been given. I heard you rejected it, fought it, killed one of the master's little pets. How ungrateful. That gift is a leash," Nami snapped, stepping forward to stand beside Naruto. "It turns people into puppets and the user into livestock." Lysander's eyes lingered on Nami, a genuine, almost scientific curiosity in his expression. "Remarkable. Two of them in one place. Mine's too sharp, too cynical to be swayed. The master has a taste for irony." He gave Nami a charming, predatory smile. "You see it as a leash, my dear. I see it as a key. A key to a world without conflict, without sadness, without want. A world where everyone adores you, and everything is yours for the taking. Why would you fight that? It is the ultimate pleasure. Because it's not real." Naruto shot back, his fists clenching. "The feelings aren't earned. The love is a lie." Lysander sighed, a dramatic, world-weary sound. "You are so young, so naive. You still believe there's a difference. Tell me, little fox, what is the point of a world that can refuse you? That can hate you? Our patron offers us paradise, and you are spitting in its face." He clapped his hands together, his demeanor shifting from philosophical to playful. "But words are boring. They lack impact. I propose a demonstration, a duel, here, now." The cage, who had been watching in stunned silence, immediately tensed. "We will have no such thing," Kuretsuchi stated, stepping forward. Lysander didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on Naruto, projecting his power in a focused, almost intimate wave. Not a fight to the death. That would be a waste of a perfectly good champion. A contest of power, yes, but more importantly, of philosophy. Let us show these delightful primitives which path is stronger, your path of struggle and earned affection, or my path of absolute, blissful control. Let's see which gift brings the world to its knees more effectively. It was a trap, and everyone knew it. If Naruto refused, he looked weak. If he fought and lost, it would prove Lysander's point. And if he fought and won, but lost control for even a second, old prove the other cage's fears correct. He would become the monster they suspected him to be. I accept, Naruto said, his voice ringing with a clarity that surprised everyone, including himself. This was more than a fight. This was a necessary declaration. He had to prove, to them and to himself, that he was not this man. The duel took place in Konoha's largest training ground, a vast, open field now ringed by a silent, watchful audience. The cage stood on a raised platform, their faces unreadable. The Straw Hats stood on the field itself, a fiercely loyal wall at Naruto's back. The rules are simple, Lysander said, stretching languidly. The first one to be unable to continue, or the first one whose audience abandons them, loses. Try not to be too brutal, little fox. I've grown quite fond of this face. The moment Kakashi gave the signal to begin, Lysander vanished. He reappeared behind Naruto, his hand outstretched, not to strike, but to gently caress his cheek. You're tense, he whispered. His voice laced with hypnotic charm. Naruto exploded away from him, creating a dozen shadow clones that swarmed Lysander from all sides. Lysander simply laughed. He didn't dodge or block. He just stood there, and as the clones' fists were about to connect, they all faltered. They looked at his handsome, smiling face, and their aggressive programming was overwhelmed by a wave of pure, unadulterated adoration. They dropped to their knees, their Rasengans fizzling out, their faces mirroring the blissful expressions of the villagers from before. You see, Lysander said, patting one of the clones on the head condescendingly. Even extensions of your own will would rather love me than fight me. He flicked his wrist, and the clones dissolved into smoke. Naruto gritted his teeth. This was the real fight. Not taijutsu, not ninjutsu, but a battle of presence. He formed a Rasenshuriken, its piercing shriek filling the arena. He threw it, a spinning vortex of chakra that tore up the ground as it flew. Lysander merely raised an eyebrow. He held out his hand, and a shield of shimmering golden energy appeared before him. The Rasenshuriken slammed into it and detonated in a titanic explosion of wind and chakra. When the dust settled, Lysander was unharmed, dusting off his perfect robes. So much effort, he sighed. So much anger. Why don't you relax? Enjoy the gift. Let me show you what it's like. And then he unleashed his power. It wasn't like the harvester's wave of despair. It was a psychic tsunami of pure, hedonistic pleasure. Naruto's mind was flooded with visions, with feelings. He felt the absolute, unconditional love of every person in the village, a warmth that dwarfed anything he had ever known. He saw Sakura looking at him with eyes full of passion, not just as a friend, but as a lover. He saw Sasuke kneeling before him, admitting his greatness. He saw himself as Hokage, not just respected, but worshipped, a god-king whose every whim was law, whose every word brought joy to his subjects. He felt the intoxicating bliss of absolute power, of a world remade in his own image, a world without pain, without loneliness, without struggle. It was everything he had ever wanted. He stumbled, his breath catching in his throat. The temptation was an anchor, dragging him down into a warm, blissful sea. He could feel his own power responding, resonating with Lysander's, wanting to join it. To embrace this perfect, effortless reality. Just let go, Lysander's voice whispered in his mind. It's so much easier. It's what you deserve. Naruto's knees hit the dirt. His vision swam. The roar of the crowd was a distant hum. This was it. This was how it corrupted. Not with pain, but with the fulfillment of every desire. But then, through the intoxicating fog, another image broke through. He saw the empty, lifeless eyes of the villagers from the farming settlement. He saw the blank, adoring faces of his own shadow clones. He saw the plastic perfection of the smile on his vision of Sakura. A smile that held no spark of her true, fiery spirit. It was a beautiful lie. A gilded cage. He looked up, forcing his gaze past the psychic mirage, and found his friends. Luffy was standing with his arms crossed, a look of simple, unwavering belief on his face. Zoro's hand was on his sword, not to intervene, but as a silent promise of support. And he saw Nami. She was watching him, her knuckles white. Her expression a mixture of terror and furious defiance. Her eyes weren't charmed. They were real. Her belief in him was real. It wasn't a gift, it had been earned, through storms and battles. Through shared jokes and stubborn arguments. It was messy and imperfect and 1,000 times more valuable than the hollow perfection Lysander offered. That was real strength. No, Naruto whispered, the single word a Herculean effort. He pushed himself to his feet, his body shaking. He looked at Lysander, and for the first time, he didn't just resist his own power. He embraced it, he seized it, he owned it. He didn't project euphoria, he didn't project calm, he projected his truth. A wave of pure, unshakable conviction rolled out from him. It wasn't an attack, it was a broadcast. It carried no visions of grandeur, no promises of pleasure. It carried the sting of scraped knees on the training ground, the salty taste of tears shed in loneliness, the warmth of the first bowl of ramen shared with a friend, the bone-deep weariness of a hard-fought battle, the fierce, protective love for his comrades that was forged in fire and blood. It was the feeling of a bond, freely given and fiercely defended. The energy slammed into Lysander's psychic illusion, and it shattered like glass. The golden light faded, the visions vanished. The crowd, which had begun to sway, their faces slackening under Lysander's influence, suddenly gasped, their minds clear. They saw not a god, but a man in fancy robes. Lysander staggered back, a look of genuine shock on his face. Naruto's projection hadn't hurt him. But it had offended him. It was like showing a masterpiece to a child who preferred to play in the mud. What is that? Lysander hissed, his composure finally cracking. That feeling, it's so raw, so mundane. It's called a bond, Naruto said, walking towards him, his eyes clear and blue and utterly resolute. He didn't radiate power anymore. He radiated certainty. It's something you have to build. Something you have to protect. It's harder than your way. It's better. He appeared in front of Lysander, his fist cocked back. This time, there was no jutsu, no clones. Just a punch. Lysander, his concentration broken, his psychic defenses shattered by Naruto's ideological assault, was too slow to react. The punch connected with his jaw. It wasn't a world-shaking blow. It was just a solid, powerful, deeply personal strike. It was the fist of a man who had chosen the hard path. Lysander flew backward, landing in a heap, his perfect hair finally mussed. He lay there, not unconscious, but utterly defeated. The adoring crowd was silent. They were just watching, their expressions clear, their wills their own. He had lost his audience. He had lost the duel. He pushed himself up, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip. He looked at Naruto with a mixture of hatred and baffled pity. You're a fool, he spat. You choose a world of dirt and sweat when you could be a god. The Weaver will be so disappointed. And when it comes, it will show you the truth. With a final glare, his body dissolved into a swirl of golden light and vanished. Silence reigned in the training ground. Naruto stood alone in the center of the field, breathing heavily, his entire being aching from the psychic strain. He had won. He had faced the ultimate temptation of his power and had not only rejected it, but had affirmed his own path. The cage on the platform were speechless. They had not just seen a fight. They had seen a man wrestle with his own soul and win. The alliance was no longer on a knife's edge. It was now built on a foundation of grudging, undeniable respect for Naruto Uzumaki himself. Later that evening, Naruto sat on the head of the fourth Hokage, the same spot where his strange journey had begun. The battle was over, but the war had just been declared. He felt a presence beside him and turned to see Nami. She was holding 2 bottles of cold tea. She handed one to him. Their fingers brushing. She didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there, watching the lights of the village flicker on. You were a complete and utter idiot out there, she said finally, her voice soft. Naruto managed a tired grin. Yeah, probably. You could have lost. You could have given in. Yeah, she took a sip of her tea, her sharp eyes fixed on the horizon. And, she added, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips, you were amazing. In that moment, sitting beside her, there was no unnatural charm, no seductive power. There was just the quiet, comfortable reality of a shared victory and a bond that was real. And for Naruto, that was a paradise Lysander could never comprehend. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Bonds of a New Crew. The départ. Ture of the cage left a vacuum in its wake, the air in Konoha thick with unspoken fears and the heavy weight of a looming war. The alliance was a fragile thing, a sheet of glass stretched taut over a chasm of doubt. They would share intelligence, they would watch the borders, but the core truth remained. Naruto was on probation. His victory over Lysander had bought them respect, but it had also cased a power that made even the strongest leaders in the world profoundly uneasy. In the days that followed, an anxious peace settled over the village. It was the quiet of a hospital room, a stillness that felt both necessary and unnatural. Naruto spent most of his time in secluded training grounds, not practicing jutsu, but meditating. He sat for hours under waterfalls or atop the tallest trees, trying to map the contours of the alien energy coiled within him. It was no longer a vague warmth, it had a voice, a personality. It whispered suggestions in the back of his mind, promising ease, affection, and influence. Resisting it was a constant, draining battle of wills. Nami became his shadow. She brought him food he forgot to eat and sat with him in comfortable silence, her presence a grounding reality check. She didn't offer empty reassurances. Instead, she'd unroll her charts, mapping the strange new continent she found herself on, her quiet, focused work a counterpoint to his internal struggle. Her pragmatism was his anchor. She didn't see a cursed power, she saw a strategic asset that needed to be understood and controlled. Their bond deepened in these quiet moments, a silent acknowledgement of the storm they were facing together. The rest of the Straw Hats did their best to integrate, with predictably chaotic results. Sanji had entered into a holy war with the Akamichi CL. And over the proper seasoning for grilled meats. Zoro, in an attempt to find the training grounds, had somehow ended up in the land of tea and had to be retrieved by a team of Anbu. Luffy, however, was a surprising source of stability. He seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation with a simple, unclouded clarity. The Weaver was a bad guy. Bad guys needed to be punched. Until it showed up, the best thing to do was eat, train, and wait. The Weaver's response, when it came, was not the grand arrival of another champion. It was far more insidious. It was a subtle poisoning of the well. Lysander's defeat had been a direct challenge, and the entity seemed to have learned from it. Instead of a focused attack, it began to bleed its influence into the world at large. It started small. A tense argument in a tavern escalated into a full-blown, chair-throwing riot over a spilled drink. Two Chunin on border patrol, friends for years, drew kunai on each other in a fit of sudden, baseless paranoia. A cloud of melancholy settled over the village, old griefs from the war bubbling to the surface, turning remembrance into a festering despair. It was a plague of the soul, and Konoha, with its dense population and deep emotional scars, was fertile ground. Then the shadows began to move. At first, they were just tricks of the light in dark alleys, fleeting shapes in the corner of one's eye. Robin, drawing on the darkest myths from her world's history, gave them a name, dregs. They were not creatures, she explained, so much as emotional sediment, the physical residue of negative feelings given form by the Weaver's ambient influence. Alone, they were weak, easily dispersed by a shout or a bright light. But the fear and anger they caused in those who saw them only fed them, made them stronger. Within a week, they were no longer fleeting shapes. They were tangible things, vaguely humanoid figures of writhing shadow and cold malice, their forms shifting and unstable. They began to attack, not to kill, but to feed. Their touch draining a person's will, leaving them listless and hollow. The crisis came to a head on a moonless night. The slow poisoning reached a critical mass. From the dark forests surrounding the village, from the depths of the sewer system, from every shadow-draped corner, the dregs swarmed. They flowed through the streets like rivers of ink, a silent, terrifying tide of despair. The shinobi of Konoha responded, their training taking over. Kunai flew, jutsu lit up the night, but it was a battle they were fundamentally unequipped to fight. A fire-style jutsu would incinerate a dozen dregs. But the fear and aggression of the attack would cause twice as many to coalesce from the surrounding shadows. A taijutsu expert could tear through their ranks, but the killing intent driving their fists only made the enemy stronger. They were fighting an enemy that fed on the very tools of war. In the center of the village, near the base of the Hokage monument, the negative energy found its nexus. A monstrous shape began to form, A great, amorphous blob of shadow, dozens of feet tall. It was a being of pure, concentrated misery, its form constantly churning with the faces of those lost in the war. Its silent screams echoing directly in the minds of everyone in the village. The assault on Konoha had begun. From the balcony of the Hokage Tower, Shikamaru watched the chaos. His brilliant mind struggling to formulate a strategy against an enemy that defied all tactical conventions. "This is a mess," he gritted out. "Every move we make strengthens them. It's a perfect defensive trap. Then we need an imperfect offense," Nami said, standing beside him. She held her klima tact, the air around her crackling with a low-level charge. Her eyes weren't filled with fear, but with the cold, calculating light of a navigator charting a course through an impossible storm. The Straw Hats didn't wait for orders. They exploded into the fray, and the very nature of the battle began to change. Frankie was a supernova of positivity. "Ow, feeling down in the dumps, you shadowy freaks," he yelled, striking a dramatic pose on a rooftop. "Let me shine some super light on the situation." He unleashed his radical beam, a torrent of pure, concentrated energy. It wasn't born of anger, but of exuberant, mechanical pride. The beam didn't just destroy the dregs it touched, it seemed to purify the very air, leaving a trail of clean, calm space in its wake. Brook was a one-skeleton concert. He leapt into a crowd of dregs, his sword flashing, but it was his music that did the real damage. He played a jaunty, high-tempo sea shanty, a song so full of life and yo-ho-ho-ing absurdity that the despair-fueled creatures recoiled as if from a physical blow. His soul was a weapon of pure, indomitable good cheer. The dregs were a plague of the heart, and the Straw Hats were the cure. Their emotions were too grand, too strange, too powerful to be consumed. Sanji's chivalrous rage as he defended female shinobi. Zoro's singular, proud focus on the path of the sword. Usopp's terrified but unwavering bravery as he fired pop greens that grew into massive, cheerful sunflowers that blasted the shadows with sunlight. It all acted as a potent antidote to the Weaver's poison. A new kind of alliance was being forged in the streets. Rock Lee, his face a mask of furious effort, found his lotus techniques weakening the dregs but also creating more. Beside him, Sanji was a blur of motion. "Put more heart into it, bushy brows," he yelled, his diable hombi igniting. "Don't fight to kill, fight for the lovely ladies you're protecting." Lee's eyes widened in realization. He adjusted his stance, his intent shifting from destruction to protection. His next attack was just as fast, just as powerful. But the emotional fuel was different. The dregs it hit dissolved without a trace. Sasuke Uchiha appeared on the battlefield like a phantom, drawn by the immense surge of negative energy. He stood back to back with Zoro, Chidori crackling in one hand, his sword in the other. Zoro merely grinned, settling into his three-sword stance. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silent respect of two master swordsmen. Two lone wolves passed between them. A massive dreg lunged, and they moved as one. Sasuke's perfect Susanoo formed, a colossal titan of amethyst chakra, while Zoro's arms bulged. A demonic aura surrounding him as he prepared his Asura. It was a fusion of spiritual power and sheer, bloody-minded will, a combination so potent it tore a hole in the shadowy army. But the heart of the problem remained. The great beast of despair at the village center was growing, feeding on the ambient fear of the battle. It lashed out with shadowy tendrils, and anywhere they touched, buildings began to crumble. Not from force, but as if they had simply lost the will to stand. Naruto stood on the Hokage Tower, watching the battle rage. He was still drained from his duel with Lysander. The constant mental battle against his own power taking its toll. He knew he could probably end this, flood the entire village with a wave of euphoria so powerful it would shatter the despair. But he would be violating the minds of thousands, proving the cage right, becoming the monster Lysander wanted him to be. He was paralyzed by the choice. Luffy landed beside him, bouncing on the balls of his feet. He looked at the giant monster, then at Naruto's conflicted face. "That thing's sad and angry," Luffy said, his observation ridiculously simple yet profoundly accurate. He cracked his knuckles and grinned. His belief a force of nature in itself. "We just have to punch the sad out of it." Something in Naruto clicked. Luffy's simple, idiotic, brilliant plan cut through all the complex morality and fear. "Don't control. Don't manipulate. Just fight for them. He didn't need to use the Weaver's cursed gift. He had his own power. Yeah, Naruto said, a true, broad grin spreading across his face for the first time in days. Yeah, you're right. He closed his eyes, drawing on the natural energy of the world. Orange pigment spread around his eyes as he entered Sage Mode, a power of pure life. The perfect counter to the dregs, despair. At the same time, Luffy bit his thumb, his body swelling as he activated Gear 4th, Boundman. Across the battlefield, Nami was coordinating a defensive line with Shikamaru and Ino. Using Ino's telepathy to relay orders and Shikamaru's strategy to direct them, Nami used her Kleam attack to create massive thunderclouds and localized gales, herding the dregs into kill zones. For a moment, her eyes met Naruto's from across the village. She saw his new resolve, the familiar, powerful glow of Sage Mode. She didn't know what he was about to do, but she gave a single, sharp nod. I trust you. That nod was all the fuel he needed. Let's go, Luffy. Right. They launched themselves from the tower. Naruto formed a Rasengan in each hand, pouring an immense amount of Sage Chakra into them until they were the size of boulders. Luffy, bouncing on the air itself, drew his fist back, compressing it to its absolute limit. Sage Art. Massive Rasengan Barrage. Gum gum. Their paths converged, their powers fusing not into a mixture, but a perfect, synergistic whole. Luffy's Haki-infused fist slammed into the Rasengans, combining the spiritual energy of Sage Mode with the physical, will-powered force of Haki. Kong Organ Rasengan. The attack was not one of rage or killing intent. It was an attack of pure, stubborn, indomitable will. It was the combined spirit of two heroes who would never, ever give up on their friends. It slammed into the heart of the despair monster, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, a light erupted from within the creature, not an explosion, but a purifying dawn. The monster of despair let out a final, silent scream and evaporated, and with its destruction, every last dreg in Konoha dissolved into nothingness. The first rays of the morning sun broke over the Hokage monument. The battle was over. The village was battered, bruised, but standing. The shinobi of Konoha looked at the strange pirates in their midst, at the cyborg giving a thumbs up, at the skeleton telling a skull joke, at the rubber boy laughing triumphantly. They weren't outsiders anymore. They were comrades. They were the unshakable, unbreakable bonds of a new, impossible crew. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Gilded Cage. The aftermath of the Dreg invasion left Konoha in a state of weary solidarity. The battle had been a crucible, forging an unlikely and unbreakable bond between the disciplined shinobi and the chaotic Straw Hat pirates. They were no longer guests. They were comrades in arms, their combined strength a testament to a new, unorthodox form of unity. But their victory was a double-edged sword. News of the attack, and the unconventional way it had been repelled, spread like wildfire through the allied shinobi forces. While Konoha celebrated its strange new heroes, the other cage saw a different picture. They saw a village that had been brought to its knees by an enemy no one understood, saved only by the intervention of a group of pirates with reality-defying abilities and a Jinchuriki wielding a power that could rewrite a person's soul. The respect Naruto had earned was rapidly being overshadowed by a far more potent emotion, fear. His control was commendable, but the scale of the power at his disposal was a threat that could not be ignored. This fear manifested not in a declaration of war, but in a far more chilling, bureaucratic form. An official, heavily sealed scroll arrived from the neutral land of Iron, a summons not for a summit, but for a hearing. They weren't asking for Naruto's help anymore. They were demanding his submission. The summons was a carefully worded ultimatum. Naruto Uzumaki, in light of the unprecedented and unpredictable nature of his new abilities, was to present himself to a neutral third party for assessment and containment. This third party was a group Naruto had never heard of, a clandestine organization that operated between the dimensions, known only as the Wardens. The scroll was an offer, wrapped in the language of diplomacy but with the cold, hard weight of a threat. Come peacefully, it implied, or we will come for you. The emergency meeting in the Hokage's office was the most tense yet. The air crackled with indignation. Containment, Kiba shouted, slamming his fist on the table. They want to lock him up. After everything he's done, it's illogical. If ruthless, strategic move. Shikamaru countered, though his own anger was visible in the tight clench of his jaw. They see a loose nuke, and they want to put it in a box. It's a pain, but from their perspective, it's the safest option for the world. It's cowardice, Lee exclaimed, his fists trembling with righteous fury. They fear what they cannot understand, so they seek to cage it. The Straw Hats were equally incensed. So, the world government here is just as rotten as the one back home, Sanji said, lighting a cigarette with a snap of his fingers. Men in power trying to chain down anyone who's free. If they want to take Naruto, Luffy said, his straw hat shadowing his eyes, his voice dangerously low, they'll have to go through all of us. Naruto himself was silent through the initial storm of outrage. He stared at the scroll, at the intricate, unfamiliar seal of the Wardens. He felt the familiar anger, the sting of being feared and misunderstood, a phantom pain from his lonely childhood. But beneath it, a cold, weary understanding settled in. He was dangerous. His power, even when used for good, had the potential for catastrophic misuse. The cage weren't wrong to be afraid. They're not wrong, he said quietly, and the room fell silent. If I were in their shoes, I'd probably be making the same call. What if the Weaver sends another champion? What if I lose control next time? What if I can't fight it forever? He looked up, his blue eyes filled with a maturity that went far beyond his years. Maybe they're right. Maybe the safest thing for everyone is for me to just go. The silence that followed was broken by a sharp, derisive laugh. It was Nami. She was leaning against the wall, her arms crossed, an expression of profound disappointment on her face. Don't be so stupid, she said, her voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a shard of glass. Everyone turned to look at her. You're Naruto Uzumaki, she continued, pushing herself off the wall and walking towards him. The man who stared down a god-level temptation and spit in its eye. The man who refused to sacrifice his morals even when it would have been the easiest way to win. And now you're going to roll over and let a bunch of scared politicians put you in a cage because you're afraid of what you might do. She stopped in front of him, poking a finger hard into his chest. That's the most cowardly thing I've ever heard. The future isn't written yet. You don't get to quit on it just because the fight got harder. We fight. We find another way. That's what we do. Her words, sharp and unforgiving, were a splash of cold water. He looked into her fierce, intelligent eyes and saw not a trace of doubt. She wasn't just offering support, she was demanding his strength, reminding him of who he was. A slow smile spread across Naruto's face. You're right, he said. What a drag. Guess we'll have to fight. Just as his resolve solidified, the air in the room grew heavy and still. A perfect, circular portal of shimmering silver light opened in the center of the office. It hummed with a clean, sterile energy, a stark contrast to the chaotic power of the Weaver. 3 figures stepped out. They were clad in stark white, form-fitting armor that seemed to be woven from solid light. Their faces were concealed behind smooth, featureless helmets. They bore no weapons, but their presence radiated an immense, disciplined power that made even Sasuke, who had appeared silently in the corner of the room, tense up. These were the Wardens. The central figure stepped forward, its synthesized voice echoing in the silent room. Naruto Uzumaki, we are the Wardens of the Gilded Cage. By the authority of the Interdimensional Concordance, we are here to extend an offer of protective sequestration. The voice was calm, devoid of malice or emotion. It was the voice of a machine executing its programming. We have been monitoring the energy signature of the entity you call the Celestial Weaver. The Warden continued. It is a Class 5 ontological parasite. Its method of propagation is predictable. It chooses a host, imbues it with a fraction of its own essence, and allows the host's amplified emotional output to cultivate an entire reality into a viable food source. The host is the focal point. Remove the focal point, and the parasite's connection to this dimension will wither. So you're just going to take him away? Kakashi asked, his hand already moving towards the kunai pouch hidden beneath his desk. We are offering him a sanctuary, the Warden corrected. A pocket dimension where the Weaver's influence cannot reach. A place where his power will be nullified, rendered inert. He will be safe. Your world will be safe. It is a peaceful, logical solution. You call a prison a sanctuary. Zoro growled, his hand gripping his swords. Your terminology is emotional, the warden replied, its blank helmet tilting slightly. We call it a gilded cage. A comfortable, humane containment facility designed for the safety of the multiverse. The alternative is less comfortable. If the host refuses sequestration, our mandate shifts to sterilization. We will sever the parasite's connection by eliminating the host. The threat was delivered with the same dispassionate calm as the offer, and that made it all the more terrifying. They weren't evil. They weren't tyrants. They were cosmic exterminators, and they had just declared Naruto to be the pest. You're giving me a choice, Naruto said, stepping forward, his friends moving to flank him. A peaceful prison, or a fight to the death. That is a crude but accurate summary, the warden confirmed. Your power is a threat not just to your world, but to any world the Weaver might target next, using you as a bridge. Your individual freedom is weighed against the potential annihilation of countless realities. The math is simple. Make your choice. The office was a powder keg. 2 world-class swordsmen, the future pirate king, a master strategist, the 6th Hokage, Sasuke Uchiha, and a host of Konoha's finest stood ready for war. Facing them were 3 beings of unknown, but clearly immense, power. Naruto looked at the central warden. He saw no room for negotiation, no chance for an appeal. They were a force of pure, unwavering logic. They were a force of nature, like a flood or a fire, and you couldn't reason with a fire. You could only fight it, or be consumed. He looked back at Nami. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. We're with you. He turned back to the wardens, his decision made. It wasn't just about his own freedom anymore. It was about proving them wrong. Proving that hope was not a statistical anomaly and that the bonds of friendship were a power that couldn't be calculated or contained. I choose a third option, Naruto said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. His own power, the Weaver's gift, flared to life, but this time he didn't suppress it. He wrapped it around his own will, shaping it into an aura of pure, unshakable leadership. It wasn't a charm that demanded love, it was a charisma that commanded respect. I'm not going with you. And you're not going to kill me. We're going to stop the Weaver. And you're going to get out of our way. The lead warden's helmet seemed to focus on him. The sterile energy in the room intensified. A third option is not mathematically probable. Your choice is registered as refusal. The warden raised its hand. Prepare for sterilization protocol. The silver portal behind them widened, and the hum of energy grew from a whisper to a roar. The battle for Naruto's freedom, and the fate of their world, was about to begin, not against a creature of malice and despair, but against the cold, unyielding log. I see of a force that believed it was the cure. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Charm of Rebellion. The world didn't explode. It simply compressed. The lead warden's raised hand pulsed with a silver light. And the very air in the Hokage's office grew thick and heavy, the pressure building until it felt like they were at the bottom of the deepest ocean trench. It wasn't chakra. It was physics, weaponized and absolute. Protocol initiated. The warden's synthesized voice stated, calm as a summer morning. Target priority. Naruto Uzumaki. Collateral damage parameters. Acceptable. But they had not stood idle. The moment the warden spoke of sterilization, 2 minds, forged in different worlds but tempered by the same strategic fire, had gone to work. Shikamaru's eyes had met Nami's, and a silent, Urias plan had been born in that shared glance. Now, Shikamaru roared. The office erupted into a symphony of planned chaos. It wasn't a panicked charge, it was a multi-pronged jailbreak. Kakashi moved first, a blur of motion as his hand shot out, not with a Chidori, but with a simple smoke bomb. The room was plunged into thick, vision-obscuring darkness. Simultaneously, Sasuke's Susanoo ribcage flared to life. A colossal cage of violet chakra erupting outwards, not to attack the wardens, but to shatter the office walls, exposing them to the open air of Konoha. Super flashbang. Frankie bellowed, his eyes replaced by blinding star-shaped lights as he unleashed a non-lethal, disorienting blast of pure photons. Through the smoke and blinding light, the wardens stood immobile, their featureless helmets turning slowly. Their systems were processing, calculating, adapting. Sensory obstruction, the lead warden noted dispassionately. Deploying countermeasures. Before they could, the rebellion was in full flight. Size Inc. lions roared to life, leaping at the wardens as tangible, momentary distractions. Robin's arms bloomed from the warden's own armor, not to harm, but to obscure the IR optical sensors for a precious half-second. It was all the time they needed. Go, 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 Nami screamed, already halfway out the shattered wall. Luffy's arms stretched, grabbing Naruto and Nami, slingshotting them out into the open air. The rest of the alliance followed, a chaotic waterfall of shinobi and pirates leaping from the ruined office onto the rooftops below. All units, scatter. Shikamaru's voice, amplified by Ino's telepathy, echoed in their minds. Rendezvous at Point Gamma. Create as much illogical chaos as you can along the way. The chase was on. The three wardens phased through the floor of the tower, reappearing on the street below with a soft hum. They didn't run. They glided, their movements unnaturally smooth and efficient, their white armor a stark beacon in the bustling village. Target is displaying evasive maneuvers, one warden reported. Probability of escape from the primary quadrant, 12.4%. Their cold logic was their greatest weapon, but it was also their greatest flaw. They expected a tactical retreat. What they got was the straw hats. Sanji and Rock Lee became a two-man whirlwind of speed and misdirection. They didn't attack the wardens directly but moved through the crowds, their impossibly fast movements creating a vortex of confusion. They'd leap over food stalls, sending apples flying, then slide under carts, creating obstacles. To the wardens, sensors. They were just low-priority targets creating random, inefficient data points that had to be processed and dismissed. Further ahead, Usopp and Kiba worked in tandem. Akamaru, barking furiously, would lead a warden down a narrow alleyway, only for Usopp to trigger a trap. Not a deadly one, but an annoying one. A net filled with sticky, foul-smelling soldier pills. A tripwire that released a dozen paint-filled balloons. It was juvenile, absurd, and completely outside the warden's combat parameters. Analysis, a warden stated, its armor dripping with pink paint. The fugitives are employing tactics with a 98% inefficiency rating for combat application. And yet, we are being delayed, the lead warden noted, its blank face turning towards the rooftops where the main group was fleeing. It raised its hand again, and a beam of pure kinetic force shot out, not at Naruto, but at the roof in front of him. The tiles exploded, the structure groaning, forcing Naruto's group to change course. They were being herded. The wardens were adapting, learning, cutting off their escape routes with cold, geometric precision. They're boxing us in, Nami yelled, her eyes darting around, mapping their shrinking options. They're pushing us toward the west gate, it's a bottleneck. Then we give them something else to prioritize, Naruto said, his eyes glowing with that now familiar charismatic light. He looked at the dozen shadow clones he had created to add to the chaos. He focused his power, not on the wardens, but on one of his own clones. He didn't project love or joy. He projected a single, overwhelming concept, significance. He poured all the potent, reality-warping energy of the Weaver's gift into that one clone, making it feel, to any outside observer, like the most important thing in the universe. The effect was instantaneous. The three wardens, who had been closing in on the real Naruto, stopped dead. Their helmets all swiveled in unison towards the single, glowing clone as it broke off from the group and sprinted in the opposite direction. Recalculating, the lead warden stated, a flicker of something almost like confusion in its synthesized voice. The target's energy signature has split. The secondary signature possesses a priority value exceeding the prime. This is not logical. Conclusion. The prime target is a decoy. The high-value signature is the true objective. Another warden concluded, engaging. The three white figures changed course, gliding with incredible speed after the single, supercharged shadow clone, ignoring the real Naruto completely. Holy crap, it worked. Nami breathed, a look of stunned admiration on her face. Don't celebrate yet, Shikamaru's voice echoed in their minds. That trick won't last long. Get out of the village. Now. They poured on the speed, blasting through the west gate in a unified rush, leaving behind a village in chaos and three confused interdimensional cops chasing a phantom. They plunged into the familiar, shadowy depths of the forest of death. The moment they were under the dense canopy of the ancient trees, the oppressive sense of being watched lessened. The wardens were formidable, but Their strength was in open engagement and clear lines of sight. Here, in the twisted, chakra-rich wilderness, the home field advantage shifted. They'll be on us again in minutes, Sasuke said, his Sharingan active. Scanning their surroundings. Their tracking is not based on sight. No, Nami agreed, pulling a small, intricate compass from her belt. It wasn't a log pose, it was a device Frankie had cobbled together. Designed to detect the strange energy the wardens emitted. The needle was spinning wildly. It's based on energy. They're homing in on Naruto. We need to break that lock. The group came to a halt in a small, mossy clearing. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. So, what's the plan, Smarty Pants? Zoro asked, leaning against a colossal, gnarled tree. More paint balloons. No, Shikamaru replied, dropping down from a branch above them. He had taken a separate route to avoid detection. This time, we use their logic against them. They expect us to run, to hide. So we're going to prepare a battle. One they can't win. The plan was audacious, complex, and deeply, wonderfully absurd. It required perfect timing and the unique skills of every single person present. For the next hour, the forest of death became a flurry of activity. Size ink birds flew silently through the canopy, acting as lookouts. Choji and Frankie worked together, uprooting massive trees and boulders, creating a carefully constructed deadfall trap. Robin used her powers to weave intricate tripwires from living vines. At the center of it all, Nami stood with Naruto. When they arrive, they will have calculated every possible outcome, she explained, her voice low and quick. But their calculations are based on the data they have. We're going to give them new data they can't process. The hum of the wardens grew louder. They were coming. They're here, Sasuke announced. The three wardens glided into the clearing, their white armor seeming to glow in the gloom of the forest. They stopped, forming a perfect equilateral triangle around the assembled shinobi and pirates. Evasive maneuvers have ceased, the lead warden stated. Probability of successful capture, 99.8%. I don't like those odds. Usopp whimpered. Then let's change them, Luffy said, cracking his knuckles. The wardens attacked, moving as one. But the allies were ready. Now, Nami, Naruto yelled. Nami thrust her clean attack into the air. Mirage tempo. The air in the clearing shimmered. Suddenly, there weren't just a dozen rebels. There were 100, 1,000. Perfect, heat-distorted illusions of everyone, layered and shifting, filled the entire clearing. The wardens paused. Analysis. Mass illusion detected. Sensory data is unreliable. Switching to energy signature targeting. Their helmets glowed, cutting through the illusions to lock onto Naruto's singular, powerful energy. That's the cue, Shikamaru yelled. Naruto closed his eyes, and 100 shadow clones appeared, dispersing throughout the mirages. Then, he did something new. He didn't just project his own energy. He reached out, using the Weaver's gift to touch the natural energy of the forest, the very sage chakra that permeated the ancient trees and soil. He acted as a conduit, drawing that vast, chaotic energy and projecting it onto every single one of his clones. To the wardens, sensors, the clearing exploded. One energy signature became 100, each one a roaring inferno of unpredictable, natural power. Warning, warning, one of the wardens blurted out, the first crack in its dispassionate facade. Mull, Tipple Class 5 energy signatures detected. Data is paradoxical. Recalibrating. Recalibration failed. Their perfect logic had hit a wall of absolute, impossible nonsense. Their systems were crashing. Now, Shikamaru roared. The trap was sprung. The vines tightened. The deadfall logs and boulders were released. The wardens, their targeting systems fried and their processors overloaded with paradoxical data, were a half-second too slow to react. The avalanche of wood and stone slammed into them, burying them under tons of raw, physical mass. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it didn't need to. The real group was already gone, slipping away through the chaos, their escape covered by the brilliant, illogical madness they had created. Miles away, they finally stopped, breathless, on a high cliff overlooking the land of fire. They were free, for now. That was the most ridiculous, insane, and brilliant plan I have ever been a part of, Sanji said, taking a long drag from his cigarette. We showed him, Luffy laughed. Naruto looked back in the direction they had come. He hadn't beaten the wardens. He had just confused them. He knew they would recalibrate. They would learn. They would come again. They couldn't spend their lives running. They needed to end this. He turned to his friends, to the bizarre, loyal, powerful family that had formed around him. "We know what the Weaver wants," he said. His voice filled with a new, hard-won clarity. "We know it has champions like Lysander. And now, thanks to Robin, we know its history. It's a predator, and the only way to deal with a predator is to hunt it." He looked at Nami, who was already unrolling a map. He looked at Shikamaru, who was already calculating the political fallout. He looked at Luffy, who was already grinning at the promise of a bigger fight. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't a fugitive anymore. He wasn't a weapon to be contained. He was a champion, but not for the Weaver. He was a champion for his world, and for the new one that had so unexpectedly crashed into his. The charm of rebellion had bought them their freedom. Now, it was time to use that freedom to start the hunt. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Heart of the Weaver. Their hideout was an echo of a forgotten time. Deep in the mountains of the Land of Fire lay a crumbling stone outpost, marked with the faint, eroded spiral of the Uzumaki clan. It was a place of ghosts and memories. A fitting sanctuary for a group of fugitives planning to wage war on a god. The air was thin and cold, but inside, a fire of defiant energy burned bright. At the center of their makeshift command center, Frankie was performing surgery on a piece of Warden technology, a sleek, white vambrace, salvaged by his quick hands during the chaos of their escape. Sparks flew as he carefully bypassed intricate locking mechanisms, a look of intense, almost joyful concentration on his face. "This tech is super incredible," he announced to the room at large. "It doesn't use gears or electricity in a way I recognize. It seems to fold space-time by mapping and following energy frequencies. It's like a compass that points to anywhere in the universe, as long as you know what song the place is singing." Beside him, Nami was hunched over a large, freshly drawn map. It wasn't a map of any landmass they knew. It was a chaotic web of lines and symbols, a navigator's attempt to chart the unchartable. "The Weaver's energy isn't a single point," she explained, tapping a central, blood-red swirl on the parchment. "It's a nexus, a whirlpool that pulls everything towards it. The Warden's device wants to go there, to the strongest frequency, but it's not a stable location. It's a storm, a dimensional hurricane. If we just open a door, we could be torn apart before we even get through. So we need an eye of the storm," Shikamaru concluded, looking over her shoulder. A moment of relative calm to make the jump. What a drag. Naruto watched them, a knot of cold anxiety in his stomach. He was the key to this. The Warden device could follow the Weaver's energy frequency because he was broadcasting it. He was their lighthouse, their homing beacon. To get to the heart of the enemy, they had to follow the poison that was already inside him. He walked over to the edge of the cliff outside the outpost, staring out at the sea of clouds below. The Weaver's gift was a constant whisper in his soul now, a seductive promise of control. He felt Nami's presence beside him before he saw her. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice soft. "No," he answered honestly, not taking his eyes off the horizon. "Every time I use this power, I feel less like myself. What if I get in there, to the source, and I can't fight it? What if I just become another Lysander?" Nami didn't offer a platitude. She didn't say, "You're too strong for that." Instead, she looked at him with her sharp, analytical eyes. "Lysander was alone," she said. "He was probably like you in the beginning. Scared, confused, but he had no one to tell him he was being an idiot. No one to ground him. He fell because he was the only thing holding himself up." She gave him a small, wry smile. "You, on the other hand, are stuck with us." He looked at her, at the unwavering confidence in her gaze. It wasn't the blind adoration his power could create, it was a trust that had been forged in battle and tempered by respect. It was real, it was his anchor. "Guess you're right," he said, a genuine smile finally breaking through his anxiety. "You guys are a pretty big drag to have to carry." Her answering punch to his shoulder was light. But the message was clear. "You're not carrying us. We're holding you up." It took 2 more days of frantic work. Finally, Frankie gave a triumphant shout. "Ow!" The The powered interdimensional gate is ready. It's a one-way trip, and it'll probably be super bumpy, but it should get us to the front door of that shadowy creep. The crew assembled. There were no grand speeches, no tearful goodbyes. They were a single, unified force with a singular purpose. Naruto stood at the head, flanked by Luffy and Sasuke. The rest of the Straw Hats and his closest Konoha friends stood behind them, a formidable, impossible army. Frankie slammed his fist onto a large red button on his modified device. The air in front of them didn't open. It tore. It was a bleeding wound in the fabric of reality. A swirling vortex of crimson and black that pulsed with a malevolent, hungry energy. It did not hum like the Warden's portal, it screamed. "Well," Luffy said, cracking his knuckles with a grin. "That looks fun." He took the first step through. The other side was not a place. It was a state of being. They landed on a ground of shifting, semi-solid shadow that felt like stepping on a bruise. The sky was a roiling ceiling of raw emotion, a chaotic aurora of sickly greens of envy, searing reds of rage, and deep, drowning blues of sorrow. There was no sun, only a pervasive, ambient light that seemed to emanate from the very air, which tasted of ozone and regret. This was the heart of the Weaver, a dimension woven from pure, undiluted feeling. "Stay close," Naruto yelled, the oppressive atmosphere making it hard to breathe. "Don't let it separate us." The Weaver was aware of them. The dimension itself began to test their wills, to pick at the seams of their resolve. Zoro, who navigated by pure instinct, found himself turned around every few steps, a subtle spatial distortion that preyed on his one weakness. Sanji felt a phantom chill, the memory of his family's cold disdain, seeping into his bones. Then, the true assault began. The Weaver didn't send monsters. It sent mirrors. For Sanji, the shadowy ground coalesced into the familiar, sterile halls of the Germa kingdom. His brothers appeared before him, their faces twisted in identical, cruel smirks. "Still playing chef, failure." One of them sneered, but the true blow came when a figure of Nami appeared beside them. Her face a mask of cold disgust. "A prince of monsters," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I could never love something so broken." For Zoro, the world became the Barati, floating restaurant where he had suffered his most humiliating defeat. Mihawk stood before him, his hawk-like eyes filled not with challenge, but with pity. "You still chase my shadow." The illusion sighed. "You have mistaken stubbornness for strength. You will never reach the top. You are, and always will be, second-rate." The words were sharper than any blade, aimed at the very foundation of his identity. Usopp found himself back in Syrup Village, but it was empty. The Straw Hats stood before him, their expressions grim. "We're sorry, Usopp," the illusory Luffy said, his voice flat. "But we're heading into a war with emperors and gods now. We can't carry you anymore. You're just not strong enough." It was the physical manifestation of his deepest, most persistent fear. Robin was hurled back to the burning ruins of Ohara, the screams of her people filling her ears. But this time, it wasn't the world government soldiers who stood over the ashes. It was Naruto, Luffy, and the others, their bodies broken and bleeding. "You see, Nico Robin," a voice whispered, "everyone who gets close to you dies. Your very existence is a curse." Nami was suddenly standing on the deck of a familiar, hated ship. The symbol of the Arlong pirates mocking her from the sail. A new Arlong, taller and more menacing, held a chained and beaten Luffy by the throat. "Draw for me, little thief," the creature hissed. "Draw a map of your new friend's worlds, or your precious captain dies." The familiar, sickening feeling of powerlessness, of being forced to betray everything she loved to protect it, washed over her in a suffocating wave. Each illusion was a perfect, personal hell. The group was separated, each trapped in a nightmare bubble woven from their own trauma. The dimension was feeding on their despair, its power growing with every memory of failure, every pang of fear. Naruto was the only one who remained untouched, but his trial was the most insidious. He wasn't shown a memory of pain. He was shown a vision of perfection. The Weaver appeared before him. It was not a monster. It was a being of sublime, androgynous beauty, woven from starlight and nebula, its form constantly shifting. Its voice the sound of 1,000 harmonious choirs. "Less than you see the flaws in them, greater than it sang, its voice resonating directly in Naruto's soul. Less than the pain they carry, the scars that hold them back. It is the nature of mortals. They are imperfect. They suffer. You, who were born of suffering, know this better than any. Greater than. The landscape around Naruto shifted. It became a perfect, peaceful Konoha. A smiling Sakura ran to him, her love pure and uncomplicated. A deferential Sasuke knelt, acknowledging his strength. The villagers adored him, their feelings genuine, born of a world where there was no more pain, no more war. Less than this is what I offer, champion, greater than the weaver whispered, its starry hand gesturing to the paradise around them. Less than Lysander sought only selfish pleasure. A shallow goal, you seek to protect, a noble one, but your protection is temporary. You save them, and they find new ways to hurt each other. I offer a permanent solution. Together, you and I, we can rewrite their souls. We can remove the flaws. We can erase the pain. We can craft a perfect, blissful reality for them. A gilded cage, yes, but they would be too happy to ever rattle the bars. Is that not the ultimate form of protection? Is that not the ultimate salvation? Greater than. The temptation was immense, a poison far sweeter than Lysander's. It wasn't an appeal to his desires, but to his deepest, most fundamental drive, the desire to save everyone. To create a world where no one had to cry like he once did. He could feel his power responding, yearning for this grand, benevolent purpose. But as the weaver's perfect world settled around him, he felt a silence, a deep, profound emptiness. He could feel the emotions of this perfect Konoha, but they were flat, one-dimensional. The love was without sacrifice, the respect without challenge, the joy without a memory of sorrow to make it sweet. And then, through the perfect silence, he felt something else. Faintly, from across the dimensional battlefield, he felt the real, messy, agonizing despair of his friends. He felt Sanji's shame, Zoro's fury, Nami's terror. Their pain was a discordant, ugly note in the weaver's perfect symphony. And it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It was real. The weaver's illusion shattered in his mind. It's not protection if you take away their choice. He screamed in his own mind. The pain is part of it. He struggle is what makes the bonds real. He looked at the celestial being before him, its beautiful face for the first time showing a flicker of surprise. He had been offered the role of a god, and he was choosing to be a friend. He didn't attack the weaver. He closed his eyes and turned his power inward, then explosively outward, but not as an attack. He became a psychic switchboard. He grabbed the raw, agonizing feeds of his friend's nightmares and connected them. Sanji, about to succumb to his shame, suddenly felt Zoro's incandescent rage at being called second-rate, and it snapped him out of his funk. That damn Marimo would never give up, he snarled, and the illusion of his brothers flickered. Zoro, his ambition wavering, suddenly felt Nami's gut-wrenching terror. The need to protect his crewmate, a drive stronger than any ambition, roared to life. Nami, he growled, and the vision of Mihawk dissolved. Usopp, about to break, felt Luffy's unwavering belief, not an illusion, but the real thing. A faint echo from the real world. Nami, on the verge of despair, felt Naruto's absolute, stubborn refusal to give in. One by one, they reached out with their real, chaotic emotions. And they pulled each other out of the weaver's perfect, sterile traps. The illusions shattered like cheap glass, and they stood together again on the shadowy ground, battered, breathing heavily, but unbroken. Their bonds, forged in the fires of real-world struggle, had been the one thing the weaver's power could not simulate, and could not defeat. They stood united, turning to face the celestial being in the center of the dimension. Its beautiful, starlit face was no longer serene. For the first time, it was displaying an emotion of its own. A cold, divine frustration. Less than you are, flawed, imperfect, greater than the weaver's voice echoed. Its harmony gone, replaced by a discordant hiss. Less than you choose pain. You choose chaos. So be it. Greater than. The dimension began to shake. The ground of shadow roiled, and the sky of emotion began to storm. The final confrontation had begun. They had survived the assault on their hearts. Now, they had to survive the wrath of a scorned god. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Unbreakable Vow. The weaver's frustration was a physical force, a shockwave of cosmic petulance that cracked the shadowy ground beneath their feet. The beautiful, androgynous facade of starlight and nebula melted away, not like a mask being removed, but like a beautiful painting dissolving in acid. What was left was a horror that defied geometry. It was a vortex, a living hurricane of raw, psychic energy. At its heart was a knot of pure, gravitational hunger, a black hole for the soul. Tendrils of every conceivable emotion lashed out from it, coils of obsidian rage, ribbons of weeping indigo sorrow. Flashes of blinding white terror. This was the weaver's true form. Not a being, but a phenomenon. An eternal, insatiable appetite. Less than flawed, greater than its voice shrieked, no longer a choir but a bilio. Discordant screams tearing through their minds. Less than you choose the ache of imperfection. Then you will be unmade by it. Greater than. The battle that followed was not a battle. It was a siege. The allies threw the sum total of their power at the maelstrom, and it was like throwing stones into a hurricane. Luffy's rubbery form swelled, his hair and clothes turning a stark, snowy white. The primal, joyous drumbeat of his heart echoed through the dimension as he entered Gear 5th. He became a living cartoon, a warrior of pure, unadulterated freedom, his laughter a weapon in itself. He stretched to the size of a giant, his hockey-infused fist big enough to shatter a mountain. Gum Gum Jonto pistol. The punch connected with the weaver's core, and for a moment, the vortex wavered. But then, the raw, joyful IGHTING spirit fueling Luffy's attack was siphoned away, drawn into the vortex like water down a drain. The weaver swelled, the joyous energy twisted into a manic, shrieking hysteria within its form. Luffy was thrown back, his transformation flickering, the very joy that powered him momentarily diminished. Sasuke's perfect Susanoo rose, a titan of violet chakra against the storm of color. Its ethereal blade, capable of cutting through any defense, sliced deep into the weaver's mass. But the cold, focused rage behind the attack was a gourmet meal for the entity. The wound healed instantly, the Susanoo's energy visibly dimming as the weaver fed on its power. Zoro became a nine-headed demon god, his Asura form twisting reality around him as he unleashed a barrage of slashes. Sanji's leg burned with the heat of his passion, each kick a fiery meteor. Frankie unleashed the full power of the General Frankie, a beam of pure, confident energy. But it was all just fuel for the fire. Rage, passion, ambition, pride, every powerful emotion they used to fight was just another course in the weaver's endless feast. They were strengthening their enemy with every blow. Stop. Nami's voice, sharp and frantic, cut through the chaos. She stood on a patch of stable ground she'd created with her Klima tact, her face pale, her eyes wide with horrified understanding. Don't you see? It's feeding on us, on our will to fight. It's what it does. Quote, Shikamaru, who had been trying to trap the lashing tendrils with his shadows, froze in realization. She's right. Every attack, every jutsu, is an expression of emotion. We're literally force-feeding it. It's the perfect defense. What a complete and utter drag. The reality of their situation descended upon them. They were trapped. To fight was to lose. To surrender was to be consumed. There was no tactical solution, no strategic retreat. They had crossed the dimensional sea only to find themselves on a shore that was eating them alive. Naruto stood watching, his sage mode active, feeling the life force of his friends being siphoned away with every attack. He saw Luffy's boundless energy falter, saw the strain on Sasuke's face. He could feel their spirits fraying at the edges. Lysander, the Harvester, the Dregs, they had all been appetizers. This was the main course, and the table was set. He had one weapon left. The most dangerous one. The one he had sworn to control. The one he feared would consume him. The Weaver's gift. He had used it to poison the Harvester with a single, overwhelming emotion. But this was the source. Pouring a cup of poison into the ocean would do nothing. He looked at his friends, at this impossible, chaotic family. He saw Usopp, terrified out of his mind, still firing pop greens in a desperate attempt to create something beautiful in this hellscape. He saw Chopper, trying to administer medical aid to a reality that was fundamentally sick. He saw Brook, playing his violin, his soulful music a small, defiant protest against the screaming chaos. They were not one thing. They were everything, all at once. Terrified and brave, selfish and selfless, loving and angry. They were a beautiful, contradictory mess. And in that moment, Naruto understood. The weaver fed on pure, refined emotions. Rage, despair, joy. It was a gourmet, a connoisseur of the soul. You couldn't poison a connoisseur with a single, simple flavor, no matter how potent. You had to poison it with something it could never, ever process. You had to serve it junk food. You had to serve it everything. This was his choice. This was the sacrifice. Not his life, his self. To win, he had to open the floodgates. He had to become a conduit for all of them, for all their pain, all their hope, all their messy, paradoxical humanity. He had to risk drowning in their collective soul to save them. He took a step forward, his sage mode dissipating, replaced by the deep, hypnotic blue glow of his own unique power. Everybody, he shouted, his voice ringing with an authority that cut through the despair. Stop fighting it. Fight with me. Lend me everything. They didn't understand, not fully, but they saw the resolve in his eyes. They stopped their attacks. Luffy, his gear fifth fading, gave a tired but trusting grin. Zoro sheathed his swords. Sasuke let his Susanoo dissolve. They turned their focus, their wills, to Naruto. He closed his EYs and opened a door inside himself that he had always kept bolted shut. He reached out with the weaver's power, not to project, but to connect. He linked his mind, his soul, to each of his comrades. The influx was a torrent that almost shattered him. He felt Luffy's bottomless desire for freedom and meat, a feeling so pure and simple it was a physical force. He was slammed with the full weight of Zoro's ambition, a lifetime of brutal training and iron-willed stubbornness. He was flooded with Sanji's passionate, chivalrous love for his friends, so potent it was a fire, but it was immediately followed by the icy, gnawing shame of his family's rejection. He felt Nami's fierce, pragmatic love for her crew, a feeling as sharp and true as a navigator's compass, tangled with the lingering terror of her subjugation under Arlong. He felt Robin's quiet, scholarly curiosity intertwined with the soul-deep grief for her lost home and the constant, quiet fear of being a curse upon her friends. He felt Usopp's crippling cowardice and his soaring, godlike bravery, two warring feelings that existed in the same heart. He felt Frankie's super pride, Chopper's earnest compassion, Brook's lonely sorrow, Sasuke's burning need for redemption, Shikamaru's weary loyalty. He took it all. The good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful. He didn't filter it. He didn't refine it. He held the screaming, chaotic, contradictory orchestra of their combined humanity within himself. For a terrifying second, he was lost, his own identity a tiny boat in a raging sea of souls. But he held on, anchored by a single, simple thought: I have to protect them. He turned to the weaver, his eyes open and glowing with the light of 100 different souls. He was no longer just Naruto. He was a vessel, a living embodiment of the unbreakable, illogical bonds of a true crew. He held out his hands. You want to feed, he roared, his voice a chorus of all their voices. Then eat this. He didn't fire a beam. He didn't throw a punch. He unleashed the raw, unfiltered, paradoxical torrent of their collective spirit directly into the weaver's core. The weaver, a being of pure, simple concepts, was hit by the psychic equivalent of a garbage disposal. It tasted Luffy's joy, but it was tainted with the bitterness of Ace's death. It tasted Zoro's ambition, but it was poisoned by the humility of his defeat. It tasted Sanji's love, but it was soured by his self-loathing. It was a hurricane of contradiction. Hope laced with despair, love laced with fear, strength laced with vulnerability. The cosmic scream of the weaver changed. It was no longer a sound of rage, but of agony and confusion. Its form began to destabilize, the pure colors of its emotional tendrils blurring into a sickening, chaotic gray. It could not process. It could not compute. The flawed, messy, imperfect engine of human connection was a poison to its perfect, sterile existence. With a final, silent, implosive shriek, the weaver shattered. The vortex collapsed, breaking apart into a trillion motes of inert, crystalline light that rained down around them like silent, glittering snow. The dimension, its power source gone, began to unravel. The ground crumbled into nothingness. The sky cracked like a broken mirror. The bleeding red portal Frankie had created reappeared, flickering violently. Everyone, go! Naruto screamed, his own energy almost spent. The psychic backlash of their shared souls threatening to tear him apart. It was a frantic, desperate scramble. Luffy grabbed the weakened Naruto and Sasuke, stretching his arms to fling them towards the exit. The others poured through, escaping the collapsing reality just as it dissolved into a final, blinding flash of white. They landed in a heap on the cold stone floor of the Uzumaki outpost. Behind them, the portal snapped shut with a sound like tearing silk, leaving only the scent of ozone and an unnerving silence. It was over. The air of their world tasted clean, fresh, real. The oppressive weight of the Weaver's influence was gone, lifted from the planet like a shroud. Naruto lay on the ground, his body trembling, his mind a quiet, echoing chamber. The power was still there, but the seductive, alien whisper was gone. It was just his. A tool, silent and waiting. He had faced the source and had made it his own. The two crews, the shinobi and the pirates, stood in the dim light of the outpost. Looking at each other, they were family, forged in a war that no one else would ever know had been fought. But they were from different stars, different seas. Luffy walked over to Naruto and offered a hand, pulling him to his feet. He looked at him, his usual grin softer, wiser. "Guess this is your stop," he said, the simple words carrying the weight of their impossible adventure. Later, as the Straw Hats prepared to find a way to their ship, Nami stood with Naruto on the cliff's edge, watching the sun begin to set over a world that was finally safe. "So," she said, her voice quiet, "the hero saves the world again. What now?" "Now," he said, his voice thick with a weariness that went bone deep, "we pick up the pieces. We go home." The unspoken question hung between them, a tangible thing in the cool mountain air. What about us? She had her dream, her map of the world. He had his, the Hokage's hat. They were anchors, duties they could never abandon. He reached out, not with his power, but with his hand, and gently took hers. Her fingers laced with his, a familiar, grounding pressure. "This isn't goodbye, is it?" he asked, his blue eyes searching hers. She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, and a slow, determined smile spread across her lips. It was the smile of a navigator who had just been told a certain island was impossible to find. "Don't be an idiot," she said softly. "Frankie has the schematics. We have a dimension-hopping god's power sitting in your back pocket. And I am the best navigator in the world." She squeezed his hand, her grip firm, a silent promise. "It's not goodbye," she vowed. "It's just a new sea to chart. We'll find a way. We always do." He looked at her, at the fire and genius and unwavering will that had been his anchor through the madness. And he believed her. The battle was won. The worlds were separate, but their story, he knew, was far from over. It was just the end of a chapter, a prelude to an adventure across the stars. Chapter 10 End.